What would it take for you to simply vanish? To walk away from a $25 million Pacific Heights mansion, a visionary tech CEO for a husband, and a life engineered for envy. Eleanor Vance did exactly that. At 5:58 on a Thursday morning, 8 months pregnant, with only a small overnight bag in her hand, she abandoned a secret she had been guarding for over a year. She left behind an 8-carat diamond and a single sentence written on a piece of paper. One sentence crafted to shatter a genius's reality and detonate everyone's future. But here's the twist no one anticipated. The ambitious protégé, who was certain the victory was already hers. She had no way of knowing what would happen next. The CEO, who could build digital empires but couldn't manage his own heart, began to fracture in ways his vast fortune couldn't fix. And the wife who disappeared was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful move is to log out for good. This is the true story of a woman who remembered her own worth, a man who realized it far too late, and a rival who stepped into an arena she was never prepared for. The events that followed will shock you, inspire you, and maybe, just maybe, force you to redefine what it means to be strong. Stay with us, because the narrative is just beginning. The smart home system in the Grand Hall softly announced the time, 5:58 a.m. On a Thursday morning, as summer began to break, Eleanor Vance made her way down the floating glass staircase of the San Francisco home she'd lived in for 5 years. One hand gripped a small leather duffel, the other rested protectively on the swell of her belly, home to the son she'd carried for 8 months. Their housekeeper, Maria, stopped polishing a chrome sculpture, her face a mask of concern that went far beyond her job description. "Are you heading out so early, Mrs. Vance?" she asked. Her voice gentle, with a warmth Eleanor had grown to cherish. Eleanor gave her a small, sincere smile that Maria would replay in her mind for weeks to come. "I am. Thank you for everything, Maria. For all of it." There was a finality in her voice that made the older woman pause, but before she could ask another question, Eleanor was slipping through the massive, pivoting front door. A pre-booked car service was waiting, melting into the sparse morning traffic, carrying her away from the $25 million estate, away from the cold perfection of her life, and away from the man who was in love with her public image, but couldn't stand her private truth. 4 hours later, Arthur Vance rolled over in the vastness of their California king bed. His hand, reaching for the familiar shape of his wife, found only the cool, empty expanse of high thread count sheets. Luxurious and vacant, he sat up, a crease forming between his brows. In 5 years of marriage, Eleanor had always been up before him, usually with a mug of herbal tea waiting on his nightstand, gliding through their home with a quiet grace he'd long since taken for granted. The silence this morning felt different, heavy with a deliberate absence. "Eleanor?" His voice, which could command a boardroom of 100 people, sounded insignificant in the cavernous master suite. Silence. Arthur rose, a prickle of unease growing as he moved through the mansion. In her walk-in closet, he saw that her worn copy of a favorite poetry collection was gone from her bedside table, a tiny detail that sent a jolt of alarm through him. Everything else looked flawless. It was all so perfectly curated, it felt less like a personal space and more like a high-end boutique. Downstairs, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the unnervingly still air. On the minimalist glass desk in his home office, leaning against a crystal award he'd won for technological disruption, was a single page torn from a moleskin notebook. It was a relic of her old life as a journalist. His name, Arthur, was written on the front in her clean, decisive hand. He picked it up. His hands, steady enough to code, for 36 hours straight, shook as he unfolded the single page. The message within was brutally efficient. I'm going to find the woman I was before I became a brand. Our son deserves to know her. Lying beneath the note, its facets catching the light with a cold fire, was her engagement ring. 8 carats, custom designed, and now utterly devoid of meaning. Arthur read the words again and again, his brain failing to process the information, caught in a feedback loop of denial. Gone where? Why now? What did she mean about their son? About the woman she used to be? He fumbled for his phone, his fingers feeling thick and clumsy as he tried to pull up her contact. It went straight to a recorded message. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. He hung up, dialed again. The same automated voice. Her sister, Isabel. She had to know something. The voicemail he reached was bright and cheerful. It was Isabel, announcing she was on a 2-month humanitarian aid mission in rural Uganda, completely off-grid and unreachable. The perfectly calculated, strategic timing of it all hit him like a physical blow. Arthur sank to the polished concrete floor, his back against the leg of his desk, the note still gripped in his hand. For the first time in his professional life, he felt a fear that had nothing to do with a hostile takeover or a market crash. This was a primal personal terror, the feeling of having his entire operating system violently corrupted. "Where is my wife?" he whispered to the empty, silent office. "Where is my son? Let me show you how they got here. Let me tell you about the perfect life that was a perfect lie. Let me tell you about a brilliant ambition that corrupted every file it touched, and about a woman who loved a man so much she had to delete herself from his life. Because sometimes, a hard reboot is the only thing that can save you." 48 hours earlier, Eleanor had woken up in that same bed, alone. The panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge stretched out before them, a picture-perfect postcard from a life that felt remote and unreal. She found Arthur's note on his pillow, scribbled on a piece of company letterhead. "Board meeting ran over. Don't wait up. A. No good morning. No, how are you feeling? Not even an I love you before the single, efficient initial." 8 months pregnant, Eleanor moved through their silent home with a slow, deliberate pace, a hand resting on her stomach. Their son kicked, a tiny, insistent pulse of life. At least she wasn't completely alone. She made her own breakfast, steel-cut oats with berries, just as her nutritionist had advised. "Good morning, little one," she whispered to her belly. "Looks like it's just you and me again." Her tablet chimed with a notification for a new article from a tech journal she followed out of habit. The headline stopped her cold. Silicon Valley's Titans celebrate at the Future Innovators Gala. The lead photo was of Arthur in a bespoke suit, looking charming and powerful. He was leaning in close to a striking, dark-haired woman in a sleek crimson dress. They were laughing, sharing a look so intimate and exclusive it felt like a violation to see it. The caption identified her as Zara Hadid, his brilliant vice president of engineering, Arthur's protégé. Eleanor zoomed in on the image, her journalist's eye analyzing the body language. The way his hand rested possessively on the small of her back. The way Zara's entire being was angled toward him, shutting out the rest of the world. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. The day before, setting up a new family tablet, she'd watched in confusion as Arthur's personal calendar had accidentally synced to the device. She'd seen a discreet entry for a weekend 2 months from now, a private, clifftop rental in Big Sur. The event was titled Our Future. Attached to the invitation was a document, a draft of a pre-nuptial agreement between Arthur Vance and Zara Hadid. It was the last piece of confirmation she needed. Eleanor picked up her mug of tea, her hand perfectly steady. She should have felt a tidal wave of fury, a crushing weight of sorrow. Instead, what rolled through her was a quiet, profound exhaustion. It was the fatigue that comes not from a lack of sleep, but from the slow, methodical erosion of hope. This was the final piece of the puzzle, she would later recount, the final piece of data I needed, because I was done fighting for a company that had already been sold. I had stopped being the CEO of my own life. She saw her reflection in a dark screen, designer maternity wear, professionally applied makeup, artfully styled hair. She looked exactly like the wife of a tech billionaire, a woman whose life was the subject of countless articles, polished, perfect, and completely hollow. I had no memory of creating that person, she recalled thinking. She was an avatar built from everything I'd tried to escape and nothing I ever wanted to become. But that was about to be overwritten, because Eleanor Hayes Vance had been quietly coding her escape for more than a year. In 48 hours, Mrs. Vance would be permanently offline. Across the bay, in a hyper-modern Soma loft, Zara Hadid was on a video call with her mentor, a glass of expensive whiskey in her hand. He's going to tell her as soon as the IPO is finalized, Zara said, her voice electric with certainty. She's just a legacy partner, a placeholder. I'm the one who shares his vision, the one who understands the empire he's actually building. On her second monitor was a file of photos of Eleanor at galas and product launches, always flawless, always a little distant, with a pleasant smile that never quite reached her eyes. She's beautiful, I'll give her that, Zara continued. But beauty without ambition is a liability. And a man like Arthur Vance doesn't need another decorative object. He needs a co-founder. She needed a partner who could spar with her over a manuscript and stand beside her at a black tie benefit. Nina minimized the acquisitions folder and opened a file named Arthur Long-Term Strategy. It was structured like a 5-year business plan, because in her mind, that was precisely what he was. Nina had clawed her way out of a blue-collar neighborhood, leveraging scholarships and relentless ambition to get a foothold in the cutthroat world of publishing. Arthur Vance wasn't just a man she wanted. He was the key to a dynasty, the ultimate merger that would secure her legacy. Her strategy was meticulous. Phase 1. Become his intellectual equal. Use her editorial position to become the only one he trusted with his most important authors. Make him believe no one else saw the literary world as he did. Phase 2. Cultivate personal dependency. Become his sounding board for the pressures of running a family empire, a space his wife, the quiet former novelist, was clearly unequipped to handle. Phase 3. The PEN America Gala. Solidify their public perception as a power couple. Phase 4. The separation. Position herself as the steadfast ally when his marriage inevitably dissolved. Every empire needs an heir. Nina knew it would be her. Nina whispered to herself as she set a calendar alert. I'm simply accelerating a natural conclusion. What Nina couldn't possibly know was that Genevieve had stopped being the lady of the manor months ago. She had already decided to step down, to vanish, to choose a quiet life over a gilded cage. The position Nina was maneuvering for was already empty. And the man she was targeting, he was about to crumble in ways neither woman could ever have imagined. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let's go back to the very beginning. To the day Arthur Vance read a short story by Genevieve Croft and decided she was the one he would acquire. 8 years before Genevieve disappeared, she was a completely different person. At 24, she was a writing fellow in Boston, teaching composition to undergrads to pay the rent while crafting short stories that won minor but prestigious literary awards. She argued with her editors over single commas and lived for the thrill of a perfect sentence. Her apartment was a fortress of overflowing bookshelves. Her income was laughable, and she had never felt more alive. On a rainy spring afternoon, Genevieve was in a cafe with her mentor, a poet named David. They were poring over edits for a story collection. A Big Five publisher, a massive conglomerate called Sterling Press, had rejected it as too literary. "If they pass on this, Jen, a unique voice gets silenced," David said, his brow furrowed. "Please, you're the real deal." Genevieve reached across the table, her fingers tapping the manuscript. "They're not going to break me," she promised. "Good writing will find a way." It did. Her agent sold the collection to a small, fiercely independent press. Genevieve stood before a packed room at a local bookstore and read her work, feeling the audience hang on every word. The book won a regional prize. Afterwards, David hugged her, his eyes shining. "See? You gave them something true." She felt it right then, that deep sense of creating a world out of words. That was her purpose. That same week, still riding the high of her success, Genevieve was at a university fundraiser. She wasn't a guest. She was just the recent award winner the English department was showing off. She wore a simple black dress, navigating conversations where the donor's watches cost more than her entire advance. That was when Arthur Vance entered the room. He was 30, the formidable head of a century-old publishing house, the scion of a Boston Brahmin family, who was making their legacy even more powerful. He had the sharp, discerning look of a man who had never had to compromise. As he spoke to the university president, his eyes scanned the room and landed on Genevieve. He excused himself and walked directly toward her. The crowd seemed to part for him. "Genevieve Croft," he said. "It wasn't a question. Your story, The Alabaster Girl, was a masterpiece of restraint." His gaze was so direct it felt like an edit, cutting away everything else in the room. "I'm Arthur Vance." "Mr. Vance," she replied, suddenly aware of the universe between them, her off-the-rack dress and his bespoke suit. The way the room's center of gravity had shifted to him. "You have a powerful voice," he said, "but you're publishing in the minor leagues." A spark of indignation flared in her. "Excuse me? You belong on the global stage with a real publisher, not collecting niche awards." He said it with such certainty, as if he could see her entire future laid out like a manuscript. Genevieve lifted her chin. "And what makes you think I'm interested in the global stage?" Arthur's lips quirked into a rare, genuine smile. "Because every great writer wants to be read, don't they? Not every writer's ambition is measured in print runs, mister." She paused deliberately. "Vance, Arthur Vance, and I would like to persuade you otherwise. Dinner." She knew she should say no. She should have recognized the warning signs, the casual dismissal of her world, the assumption that she was a talent to be acquired. But he was looking at her like she was the most brilliant author he had ever discovered. And after years of fighting for every reader, that kind of validation was intoxicating. One dinner, she agreed. One dinner led to another, then a weekend trip to a literary festival in London. It was a whirlwind 6-month courtship that felt like a novel. Arthur introduced her to her literary idols. He debated the merits of her favorite authors, and he listened, really listened, to her ideas. He bought her a vintage typewriter, not jewelry, seeming to grasp what she truly valued. He met her mother, a librarian in their modest Cambridge apartment, and charmed her with his knowledge of classic literature. As they left, her mother took her arm. "Are you certain about him, Jen?" she asked, her expression worried. "That world, it can silence people. Make sure you don't lose your own voice in his." "He loves my voice, Mom," Genevieve insisted, believing it completely. "He sees me." "Just make sure he's still listening in 5 years." 6 months after they met, Arthur proposed at the top of the Boston Public Library, the city lights twinkling below them. The ring was an antique, once owned by a famous female novelist. Genevieve said yes, because she thought this was her happy ending. Their wedding was a quiet, elegant affair. Genevieve wore a timeless ivory gown. She carried a bouquet of peonies and felt like she was stepping into a classic story. In the wedding photos, she is radiant, completely unaware that she was trading her career for a title, her voice for something quieter, more refined, and infinitely smaller. The edit is always subtle at first. Year 1. Arthur was closing a publishing deal in London and missed the award ceremony, where Genevieve's book was honored. She accepted the plaque alone in their Beacon Hill townhouse, drinking champagne and wondering why the win felt so hollow. Year 2. Genevieve told Arthur she was starting a new novel. His response came as he scanned the evening paper. Why would you do that? The pressure to write a second book is immense. You can chair the library's literacy foundation. You don't need to struggle. It's not a struggle, Arthur, she tried to say. It's who I am. You do more for literature on my arm at these galas, he countered. Supporting the house I'm building. That has a far greater impact than one little book. Genevieve dropped the subject. She was drained from planning a benefit the night before and lacked the will for a debate. That is how the story is revised, through small deletions. Year 3, she tried to set up a small writer's workshop. Arthur was preoccupied, and when he finally noticed, his comment was casual but sharp. Darling, those aspiring writers will only drain you. You were meant for bigger things. Year 4, Genevieve stopped talking about her next book. Arthur stopped asking about it. Year 5, Genevieve discovered she was pregnant. She told Arthur over breakfast, her heart fluttering with a mix of terror and hope. His face lit up, but his words landed like a cold, heavy paperweight on her soul. Wonderful, an heir. Not a child, not our baby, an heir. Another chapter in the Vance legacy, a character defined before it was even born. Year 6. Genevieve was a ghost in a historic home. She planned literary salons, smiled for society pages, and slowly faded. The woman in the mirror was a character she no longer recognized. At 7 months pregnant, Genevieve was organizing files on Arthur's home computer when she found a document in a mislabeled folder. Her eyes scanned the text until the title caught her breath. A meticulously detailed document formatted like a professional proposal titled The Vance Acquisition. The author was Nina Rossi, his star editor. She sat in the grand library she never wrote in, her old typewriter collecting dust in a corner. She did not weep. The ink had long run dry. She wiped her eyes, opened a new, blank document on her laptop. At the top of the empty page, in a clean, steady font, she typed, Final Manuscript. That was 18 months ago. Since that day, Genevieve had been outlining her escape with the same precision she once used to plot a novel. She had mastered the art of being an overlooked character in her own marriage, and now she would use that anonymity to write her own ending. Every day, she withdrew $500 in cash. With each trip to the organic market, she'd get cash back, always just under $100. She tucked the bills into the hollowed-out spines of old journalism textbooks, rolled them into the lining of a camera bag he never knew she still had, and sealed them in a waterproof pouch hidden in the water tank of a guest toilet. Arthur never entered those spaces. He barely noticed her moving through them. She opened a savings account under her maiden name, Reed, at a small credit union in the Bronx, a borough he associated only with traffic on the way to the airport. The teller, a young woman with sharp, kind eyes, gave her a look of quiet solidarity when Clara insisted, "This is a personal account. My name only." "I get it," the woman nodded, her voice low. She conducted all her planning on a burner laptop, bought with cash, using the public Wi-Fi at a library in Queens, always behind a Tor browser, always wiping the session clean. She researched small, quiet towns in coastal Maine and Vermont, places where Clara Prescott would simply cease to be because a woman named Chloe Reed was about to be born. She paid cash for a prepaid phone. She rented a small P.O. box in a New Jersey suburb she'd never been to before. She tapped old contacts from an investigative story she'd done on identity theft to secure new documents. She practiced the signature for Chloe Reed over and over until the script felt more like her own than the married name she currently wore. The plan accelerated the moment she learned she was carrying a daughter. Arthur's word, legacy, had chilled her to the bone. Her girl wouldn't be raised. She'd be curated, molded into a brand ambassador, not a person. Clara refused to let that happen. She packed a single, durable backpack and hid it inside an old equipment case in the back of their cavernous closet. It held hiking boots, her favorite worn-out sweater from college, the ultrasound photos, her grandfather's old compass, and a dog-eared copy of a poetry anthology. Nothing Arthur had ever given her, and absolutely nothing belonging to Isabelle Laurent. Using the untraceable phone, she sent a coded email to her sister. "Hey, decided to finally take that solo cross-country trip we used to talk about. Going off-grid for a while to find a better signal. Don't worry, I'm safe." Her sister, who knew her better than anyone, would understand the subtext. 2 weeks before she was set to disappear, Clara had her final ultrasound, the one Arthur had promised he would attend to see their baby. She waited in the sterile, high-end waiting room, watching other couples. The men rubbed their partners' shoulders, their eyes fixed on the women, present and engaged. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur, sent 10 minutes before her appointment. "Project Chimera is critical. Can't break away. You understand?" It wasn't a question or an apology. It was a directive. The obstetrician's smile was gentle and knowing. "Where's the proud papa today?" "Building an empire," Clara said, the phrase tasting like acid. "He's always building." The ultrasound image resolved on the screen. "You have a daughter," the doctor said warmly. "A perfectly healthy, active little girl." Clara laid her hand on the cool screen, a silent tear slipping down her temple. "Hi, Thea. I'm your mom. And I swear, you will know what it is to be loved, not just leveraged." That same night, as Clara sat alone in their penthouse overlooking a glittering Central Park, Arthur was dining with Isabelle at Per Se. It was the same corner table where he had proposed to Clara. Isabelle wore a dress the color of blood and money. They discussed Project Chimera, their shared power, and the future that had no place for a pregnant wife. "So, what is the timeline on your domestic restructuring?" Isabelle asked, swirling a glass of rare scotch. "As soon as the Chimera deal is signed. The prenup is a fortress. She gets a generous payout and fades away. And if she makes things difficult?" Arthur's smile was thin, metallic. "My lawyers will make her existence so toxic, she'll beg to sign." Isabelle leaned closer, her voice a purr. "I'm not her, Arthur. I'm not going to be planning galas. I'm going to be sitting beside you in the boardroom." "I know," he said. "That's why it's you." They clinked glasses, toasting their ascension, completely unaware that across town, Clara was finalizing her own quiet revolution. That night, she discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Unable to sleep, she'd picked up the shared family iPad to look up infant sleep schedules. Left open on the screen was a draft email from Arthur's synced account. The recipient was his lead attorney. The subject line, Post-Chimera Transition. The text was a cold, methodical blueprint for her removal, detailing the severance package and the timeline to initiate proceedings the day the deal closes. It named Isabel as his primary partner, personally and professionally. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a business plan typed out in 12-point font. Clara's vibrant past as a journalist had been muted since her marriage, turning her into a polished, silent accessory. She'd almost forgotten the woman she used to be. But reading that email, that woman, the one who could find the truth and act on it, woke up. There was no need for an anonymous tip. Arthur had handed her the evidence himself. It was painfully clear he would never save her. The board was set. The players were in position. In 24 hours, Clara Prescott would vanish, and the world they had built would fracture. Saturday evening, 10 p.m. Clara stood in the vast, silent kitchen of the penthouse, 7 months pregnant. She was performing a final, quiet ritual. The menu was a single, white orchid, which she placed in a slender vase on the dining room table, the same kind Arthur used to have delivered to her every week when they were first married. She had dismissed the household staff for the weekend, needing this sterile silence for her last act. The faint sweet scent of the flower filled the air, a fragrance both nostalgic and agonizing. Her hands were steady, a muscle memory from arranging flowers in their first tiny Brooklyn apartment, while her mind made a final recording of the scene. The necklace of city lights encircling the park. The muted symphony of sirens from 50 floors below. The crushing weight of her diamond ring. A brilliant, perfect lie. Arthur came home at 10:30, not with another woman's perfume on his collar, but with the almost visible hum of a massive deal closing. He was on his wireless earbuds, his voice crisp and decisive as he strode through the apartment. He did not see the orchid. "Isabel, I need those projections synced to my drive. Yes, now. The board meets at 0600. Clara stood by the table without speaking. Arthur ended his call and finally noticed her. He glanced at the table, his eyes passing over the flower. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone distracted as he opened his laptop. She watched him for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she gestured to the vase. "It's an orchid," she said, her voice even. "You used to send them to me." A flicker of something, not memory, but cognitive processing, crossed his features. He was searching a database for a file that had long been deleted. Huh. It's nice. He had no memory of Brooklyn, of their tiny kitchen, of the promises made over cheap wine and dreams. He had forgotten. Or, more likely, he had never truly saved those memories to his hard drive. Clara stared at his face, committing it to memory. The sharp angle of his jaw, the cool blue of his eyes, focused on the screen, the complete and total absence of her in his world. This was the justification she needed. This was the image that would fuel her steps when she walked away. After a few minutes of typing, Arthur disappeared into his home office for a round of calls with his team in Tokyo. Clara cleared the single vase, moving through the silent penthouse like a ghost, saying goodbye to the beautiful, empty cage. She paused at the nursery door, looking at the biometric smart crib and the algorithm-approved mobile. It was a room optimized for performance. "I'm sorry I couldn't make this data point a home for you, my sweet girl," she whispered to the life inside her. "But I promise you'll have something better. You'll have a mother who loves you more than any legacy." At 1 a.m., Clara put her plan into motion. She pulled her packed backpack from its hiding place. Her hands were trembling. Every sound was magnified. The rustle of the durable fabric, the soft click of the buckle, the frantic, loud rhythm of her own heart. Arthur's smartwatch lit up the nightstand. Clara froze, every muscle tensing. If he woke, if he saw her dressed and holding a bag, the dream of freedom would die right here. The screen cast an eerie glow on his sleeping face. It was a notification from Isabel. The deal is done. We are done. A rocket emoji followed. Arthur murmured, turning onto his back. Clara, you up? The sleepy sound of his voice was a chain trying to pull her back. Just finalizing the nursery plans, she murmured, her voice a practiced calm. I had an idea. The baby's restless. We have a designer for that, Damien sighed, his voice thick with sleep. Come to bed. He rolled over, already sinking back into unconsciousness, utterly certain that the world he had designed would be exactly as he left it. It never entered his mind that she would leave. In Damien's world, people were fixtures in his grand designs, not elements that could choose to walk away. Clara stood frozen for what felt like an hour, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, waiting for the wild pounding in her chest to slow. Then, with methodical quiet, she slid the tablet back into her weather-proof messenger bag, delaying her escape until the deepest part of the night, when the city's hum would finally die down. At 4:30 in the morning, Clara changed into dark-washed jeans and a plain gray rain jacket from before her marriage, clothes that rendered her invisible in a city of shadows. She pulled her hair back under a simple cap, her face free of makeup. The woman who stared back from the reflection in the dark window was finally someone she recognized, not Clara Sterling, just Claire. She took one last walk through the penthouse. She gave herself one final, aching look into the nursery. Her hand brushed against the cold, acrylic frame of the crib her child would never know, beneath the minimalist mobile that would never spin for him. Downstairs, she walked to the enormous concrete island in the kitchen. She placed the dead orchid, its petals brown and brittle, in the center. Next to it, she set down her tablet, the screen glowing with an open email draft that would bring his world crashing down. The foundation is compromised. The entire structure is a failure. She placed her wedding ring, a stark, architectural band of platinum, beside the tablet. The custom piece, a symbol of a broken blueprint, reflected the city's distant, cold lights. It was a hollow, lifeless gleam. Claire took only one thing from that life: a small, worn hand trowel from a botanical expedition years ago. Not to remember Damien, but to remember the woman she had been, curious and alive, before she had let herself become a decorative object. I'm not raising my son in a glass box, she whispered toward the silent master suite. I'm taking him somewhere he can grow roots. At 4:45, Claire stepped into the silent, private elevator. The messenger bag felt impossibly light, holding the seeds of her new life. The elevator descended, each floor a quiet farewell to Mrs. Sterling, and a step closer to Claire Evans. The lobby, a cavern of marble and steel, was empty save for the overnight concierge. It wasn't their regular, Carl, but a younger man named Leo, who didn't recognize her on sight. He looked up from his screen, confused. Mrs. Sterling, you're leaving early. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't planned for this, for a human variable in her precise calculation. Couldn't sleep, she said, her voice steady, driving out to the peninsula to see the dawn bloom. Leo's gaze shifted from her face to the practical messenger bag. She saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a sense that the story didn't match the subject. Shall I have the driver bring the Tesla around? No. The word came out too fast, too sharp. Claire took a calming breath and offered a small smile. No, thank you. A colleague is picking me up. I didn't want to disturb Damien. He has a big presentation. Leo held her gaze for a second too long. Claire's heart hammered. He knew. He had to sense something was wrong. But then he just gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right. Have a good trip, Mrs. Sterling. A nondescript hybrid pulled up to the curb, hailed from a burner phone app. Claire pushed through the enormous, heavy glass doors Doors Carl would have always opened for her, and stepped out of her gilded cage into the damp, misty chill of a Seattle morning. She never looked back. The water taxi operator grunted a greeting as she hauled her duffel bag aboard. No conversation was necessary on the 4:45 a.m. crossing to the mainland. The terminal at King Street Station was an echoing hall of brick and iron, populated by cleaning crews and a handful of weary travelers. Claire kept her cap pulled low, her face turned away from the security cameras. At the Amtrak ticket counter, the agent was a young woman whose tired eyes matched the pre-dawn gloom. "One ticket to Whitefish, Montana," Claire said. The agent squinted at her screen. "That's a long trip, ma'am, all the way." Claire felt a surge of adrenaline, an irrational fear that Damien's face would suddenly appear on the news screen behind the agent. Or worse, his personal security team would materialize to escort her back. "I'm sure," she replied evenly. She paid with cash, worn bills she had carefully saved from a secret online business selling rare plant cuttings. No card, no name, no trail. The paper ticket in her hand felt like a passport to a new identity. At a newsstand, she saw his face on the cover of a design magazine. Damien Sterling, the architect of tomorrow. In the photo, she stood slightly behind him, a beautiful, silent accessory. She pulled her cap down farther and turned away. A young man in a tech company fleece gave her a second look. "Hey, you look just like the Empire Builder, now boarding on track 5. Claire moved quickly, her body still unaccustomed to the new life growing inside her, the duffel bag bumping against her leg. She didn't relax until she was settled in her seat in the very last car, hidden in a window seat, shielded by the glare of the lights and a lifetime of being overlooked. The train lurched into motion at 5:31 a.m., the exact moment the burner phone she'd left in a taxi would signal its arrival at SeaTac Airport's long-term parking. As the Seattle skyline dissolved into the gray mist, Claire felt a fundamental shift within her. Not a collapse, but an awakening. A slow, powerful uncurling of something she thought had died. The woman sharing her seat, older, with the sharp, observant eyes of a professor, noticed the single tear that slipped down her cheek. "Running from a bad blueprint, honey?" Claire hastily wiped her face. "Is it that obvious?" 30 years ago, I ran from a department head who thought my research was his intellectual property," the woman said. "Best damn field trip I ever took." "What if this is a catastrophic mistake?" Claire whispered. The woman's mouth curved into a knowing smile. "And what if it's the first day of building something that's entirely your own?" The train pushed east, carrying Claire Evans toward a future that was both unknown and liberating. Behind her, Mrs. Damien Sterling was already becoming a ghost. In their waterfront penthouse, Damien Sterling slept, completely unaware that his perfectly engineered world had developed a fatal structural flaw. He would wake in an hour to a cold bed and an even colder truth. He would find the dead plant, see the glowing tablet, click the link named structural_failure, and begin a fall that none of his millions could prevent. But Claire wasn't thinking about that. She thought about her child, kicking softly inside her. Safe, wanted, and finally free. She thought about a future she would cultivate herself, under her own name. She thought about a small arboretum in Montana she'd seen online that needed a manager, one that had a little cottage available for a woman expecting a baby, with no references and a new name. Mrs. Sterling was an illusion, but Claire Evans was about to be born. The train chased the coming dawn, and Claire watched the sky begin to lighten on the first day of the rest of her life. Damien's smart home program, initiated at 6:52 a.m., automated shades glided up with a barely audible hum, letting in the soft, gray light of the Seattle morning. His hand moved across the cool linen sheets, a motion ingrained by 6 years of habit, seeking the familiar warmth of Clara's body. Cold fabric, empty space. He sat up, a frown creasing his face. In their entire life together, Clara had never not been there when he woke. She was as predictable as a building code, as essential as his morning espresso. It would be waiting on his nightstand, brewed to exactly 92 degrees Celsius. She would be dressed, moving through their morning routine with the quiet efficiency he found so calming. Not this morning. Clara? His own voice sounded wrong in the silence, uncertain in a way Damian Sterling, the man who reshaped skylines, was never uncertain. Nothing. He got out of bed, pulled on a cashmere robe, and moved through the vast, quiet suite. The bathroom was pristine, her cosmetics arranged like a minimalist display. Her closet was a cathedral of designer clothing, perfectly curated, untouched. But her old, worn gardening boots were gone from the mudroom, a tiny, insignificant detail that sent a jolt of wrongness through his entire body. "Clara, honey," he called out, his voice louder now, tinged with an unfamiliar edge of panic. The penthouse was profoundly still, the kind of silence that signals an absence, not peace. Damien descended the floating staircase, his bare feet cold on the polished concrete. In the kitchen, the morning light illuminated the massive concrete island, and that's when he saw it. A single dead orchid, brown and withered, stood where a vibrant one always bloomed. Next to it was her tablet, its screen glowing. He walked closer and read the email draft on the screen. The subject line was one word: goodbye. "I've gone to find my own music. Please don't look for me. Our son deserves a mother who plays her own song." He read the curling script on the single sheet of music paper left on the closed lid of the Steinway. His analytical mind, trained for market volatility, couldn't process the words. It was a variable he hadn't accounted for gone, where, what did she mean? Her own song. She was Clara Sterling. She was his wife, the mother of his heir. She couldn't just divest herself from his portfolio. He fumbled for his phone. Dialing her number, it went directly to a placid, automated voicemail. He called again and again, with the same result. Her sister would know she had. To the number he had for her was also disconnected, replaced by a message about a month-long silent yoga retreat in Costa Rica. Off the grid. Too convenient, too planned. Arthur called his head of security, Dimitri. "Did you see Mrs. Sterling leave?" "Yes, sir, 5:15 this morning. She took a town car." "Not the Bentley said she was visiting a friend's cottage in the Berkshires for a day or two. She had one duffel bag. She seemed quite content." "Sir." Very calm. Calm, the word, registered like a flash crash in Arthur's brain. Not hysterical, not enraged, not in a panic. Calm like this was just another scheduled transaction, like she had executed this with the cold, deliberate precision of a master trader. Arthur sank onto the leather ottoman, his hand crushing the note for the first time since a bad trade nearly bankrupted his first fund. He felt a visceral, primal dread, the kind that had nothing to do with SEC investigations, or market downturns and everything to do with a core asset being liquidated without his consent. "Where is my wife?" he whispered to the cavernous, silent penthouse. "Where is my son at 9 o'clock in the morning?" Chloe let herself into the penthouse with her own key fob. She'd had one for months. She was carrying 2 kale smoothies and wearing her ambition like custom-tailored armor. "Arthur, darling, you completely ghosted me last night." She stopped short, seeing him by the window, still in a silk robe, looking like a stock chart, after a catastrophic earnings call. In all the months of their affair, she had never seen him like this. Arthur Sterling was always a titan. Composed, calculating, this man was a ghost. What happened? Arthur held out the crumpled sheet of music. Without a word, Chloe took it to her own tablet, scanned it, and her expression shifted from confusion to a barely suppressed thrill. before she expertly rearranged her features into a mask of deep concern. Gone? What does that even mean? Gone. She left took our son, just disappeared, his voice was hollow. A flatlined Chloe sat beside him, her mind already running scenarios and calculating outcomes. This was her opening the hostile takeover. She had been positioning herself for over a year. Clara was out of the way, clearing the board for Chloe to become the next Mrs. Sterling. She just had to manage the acquisition flawlessly. Oh my God, Arthur, the baby. Is he all right? Should we call the police and tell them what my pregnant wife left a cryptic note and vanished? She's a grown woman. Chloe placed a perfectly lacquered hand on his forearm. Arthur has, she seemed unstable. Lately, pregnancy can trigger severe perinatal depression. You know, sometimes, even before the baby arrives. Arthur seized the diagnosis like a drowning man, grabbing a life raft. She has been quiet, withdrawn. We need to handle this discreetly for her own good. If the press gets a whiff of this, it could destroy her reputation. They might say she's unfit. The words were pure poison designed to protect Chloe's ascent as much as his own privacy. If the world knew Clara had left, they would dig for a reason. They would find Chloe, they would brand her a homewrecker, not an heir apparent. Arthur nodded, his gaze fixed on the skyline, not registering the cold triumph in her eyes. You're right. We'll keep it between us. What neither of them knew was that across town, a reporter at the New York Times was slitting open a padded envelope Clara had mailed a week prior. The envelope contained internal memos from Sterling Capital detailing a pattern of predatory short selling. The documents that showed Arthur Sterling's firm was algorithmically targeting vulnerable companies. The documents that would soon reveal that Arthur's wife hadn't just left him, she had declared war on his entire kingdom. At 10 a.m., Arthur was in his home office on a secure video line. His head of personal security had never seen him so unraveled. The mask of absolute control was gone. Get me Martinez, the best private investigator in the city. I don't care what he charges by noon. Martinez was sitting in Arthur's office, a former NYPD detective with tired eyes and a legendary ability to find people who didn't want to be found. He analyzed the note with detached professionalism, while Arthur paced. Your wife opened a new bank account a year and a half ago under her mother's maiden name, O'Connell. She's been making small cash deposits every week, $500 here and there, plus cash. Back from Whole Foods. Total moved over 18 months comes to just over $210,000. Arthur stopped pacing. What she bought a Greyhound ticket this morning at Port Authority 6:10 a.m. paid cash. It's a cross-country route with over 50 stops between here and the West Coast. She was wearing a wig and sunglasses, and she paid a couple of homeless guys to create a diversion at two other bus line counters. Martinez swiped on his tablet to show a blurry still from a security camera of Clara in a hoodie. A total stranger compared to the polished Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, your wife didn't have a breakdown. This was a tactical extraction. She's been living almost entirely in cash. One single online purchase 2 years ago for a vintage electric piano. That's it. Total funds on hand when she left were approximately $230,000. Arthur stopped staring out the window. Peterson, we ran the facial recognition scan this morning, sir. A match from a small arts blog in Vermont. A reviewer mentioned a pianist named Liz O'Connell. The description of her playing style is a perfect match for your wife's early reviews from Juilliard. He slid a tablet across the marble desk, a photo of a woman. Her hair in a messy bun, her hands on a keyboard, smiling a genuine, unburdened smile, utterly unrecognizable. As Clara Sterling. Mr. Sterling. Your wife didn't just run, she liquidated her entire identity. This was a masterclass in vanishing. She's been orchestrating this for at least 2 years, Mr. Sterling. The words struck Arthur like a physical blow over 2 years while he'd been building his empire, securing his legacy and sleeping with Chloe. Clara had been planning her great escape. She had been living in his home, attending his functions, sleeping in his bed, all while meticulously plotting to disappear. Find her, Arthur commanded, his voice tight with a cold fury. I don't care what it takes. Find my wife, Martinez. His private investigator looked at him with an expression that bordered on pity. Sir, when someone goes to these lengths to disappear, they usually stay gone, and the courts, they tend to favor the mother, especially a pregnant one, escaping a high-pressure marriage. I gave her a world. Did you give her a place in it? The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswered. Over the following week, Arthur descended into a private hell. Martinez's investigation uncovered the elaborate architecture of Clara's secret life. The small savings account she fed with cash for months, the storage unit in Hoboken, rented under her mother's name, the chain of burner phones that left a digital ghost trail, leading nowhere, first to Chicago, then to New Orleans. They were always chasing a phantom, a woman who had taught herself to be invisible. Arthur stopped going into the office. He ignored his partner's frantic calls and let Chloe's texts go unanswered. He spent his nights driving along the Hudson River, parking near the small jazz club where they'd had their first date. He'd stare at the darkened windows as if he could will her to materialize at the piano inside. An old doorman saw him there one evening. You look like you lost something, son. My wife is gone. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes on the street. Sometimes a person has to leave the orchestra to find their own music. The phrase echoed in Arthur's mind. He started to see his marriage through a new lens, one not distorted by his own towering ego. He remembered how Clara's talk of Debussy and Chopin had slowly been replaced by silence. He recalled how she, a Juilliard prodigy, had become just another beautiful acquisition in his art-filled penthouse. She had become smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, until she was just a whisper in their own home. He had done. That he had taken a woman who burned with musical fire and tried to reprogram her into a silent, predictable part of his portfolio. He had taken her brilliant talent and smothered it with his cold, relentless ambition and the casual cruelty of a man who had stopped seeing the person right beside him on day 12. Martinez found the first real lead. It wasn't digital. It was an order for a rare out-of-print book of sonatas shipped to a general delivery address in Asheville, North Carolina. Arthur was on his private jet within the hour, desperate for any connection to the woman who had vanished. Asheville was a town of 94,000 people, a place where a newcomer might not stand out. The postal clerk remembered Liz O'Connell. Quiet woman, very pregnant, picked up a book about a month back, said she was heading deeper into the mountains, looking for some peace. Arthur sat in his rented Escalade on a street lined with craft breweries, and he slammed his fist on the dashboard. He just roared until his voice was shredded, until he had expelled a fraction of the rage and panic and raw loss that was consuming him. He was always chasing her echo, always a step behind, always 1,000 miles from where she had been on day 14. Chloe Vance was making the penthouse her own, a new smart crib here, a state-of-the-art baby monitoring system there. Isabel was methodically erasing any sign that Amelia had ever lived in the penthouse. She met with an architect to draft plans for a complete overhaul, all steel, glass, and shadow, an altar to ruthless ambition. Mrs. Thorne's aesthetic is no longer relevant, she told the man with a dismissive wave. And once the legal matters are settled, there will be a new Mrs. Thorne. What Isabel was unaware of was that Arthur Vance, Marcus's father's old partner and a senior board member, was observing her from his own tower across the city. He was quietly auditing server access and trade log authorizations, mapping out how Isabel had systematically become Marcus's shadow, whispering in his ear, Arthur had been Marcus's advocate, but now he was forced to be his watchdog, and the web of influence he was uncovering would bring the entire firm to its knees. The 21st day dawned. It was the day of the final board presentation for Thorn Capital. Project Chimera, Marcus's magnum opus, was set to be unleashed. He was supposed to enter that room as the undisputed king of Wall Street. Instead, he looked like a ghost haunting his own life. He was unshaven, his bespoke suit was rumpled, and his eyes were dark, hollowed-out craters of despair. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Arthur pulled him into a side office. "Marcus, we can postpone. You're in no state for this." "I'm fine," Marcus snapped, his voice thin as glass. "Let's just get it done." The presentation started with a tense silence. Marcus stood before the polished mahogany table, the Chimera logo glowing like a predator's eye on the screen behind him. "Members of the board, Project Chimera will redefine." His focus shattered. The profit projections on the 80-inch display blurred into an incoherent mess. The only thing he could see were the words from Amelia's email, sent from an untraceable account. "Your son deserves a father whose heart is more valuable than his portfolio." "Marcus?" A board member's sharp voice cut through the haze. "The 5-year forecast. Are you feeling all right?" He stumbled back into his leather chair, the skyline outside the window seeming to tilt. 30 eyes were fixed on him, a blend of concern and corporate impatience. "We were all very sorry to hear about Amelia," another director offered, attempting to sound gentle. "Has there been any word?" Something deep inside Marcus finally fractured. He stood, a raw, broken sound that might have been a laugh escaping his throat. "You want word on Amelia? I'll give you word on Amelia." His voice tore, climbing an octave. "She's gone, disappeared. I have no idea where she is. I don't know if my own son is safe. I don't know why she did it. I know nothing." He tried to steady himself, his knuckles white, as he gripped the back of a chair. "I had it all. I built an empire, and she... The sobs seized him then, raw, violent spasms that shook his entire frame. The sound of his guttural, shattered grief echoed in the acoustically perfect boardroom. Marcus Thorne, the titan of New York finance, collapsed back into his seat and wept like a terrified boy. "I don't even know if he's okay. What if he's in danger? What if the baby..." The 30 board members were frozen. They had come to witness the launch of a revolutionary trading algorithm. Instead, they were watching the complete and utter psychological collapse of its creator. At the far end of the room, Isabel watched with a cold, rising horror. This was not the man she'd attached herself to. This broken, sobbing mess was not the predator she had gambled everything on. He was pathetic. Arthur stood, his voice cutting through the tension with calm authority. "This meeting is over. Gentlemen, if you please, clear the room now." The directors filed out, their footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Only Arthur remained, watching as Marcus sobbed, destroyed by the absence of the woman he had treated like a beautiful acquisition. "I loved her, Arthur," Marcus choked out between sobs. "I loved her." "No," Arthur said, his tone quiet but sharp as a razor. "You loved owning her. You loved that she was graceful and intelligent, a perfect accessory for your life. You never loved Amelia, because you never bothered to know the woman herself." The words were both a condemnation and an undeniable truth, and they shattered the last of Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed reality. That evening, he checked into a discreet wellness facility for exhaustion, malnutrition, and what the intake form gently termed an acute psychological crisis. Isabel made an appearance, playing the part of the concerned, loyal partner. But when Marcus looked at her, he saw a distorted mirror of his own greed, a person who craved what he had built, not the man he was. It was exactly what he had done to Amelia. "Leave," he said, his voice empty. "Marcus, I'm here to support you." "You're not her. You will never be her." Isabel's mask of composure finally disintegrated, revealing the cold fury underneath. "She abandoned you. I am the one who is here." "I know," he replied. "And that's the issue. You are here for the empire. She left because of the man who destroyed everything." Isabel walked out of the clinic, the future she had so carefully engineered turning to dust around her. And somewhere in the mountains of Vermont, more than 200 miles away, a woman named Chloe felt her baby kick. She rested a hand on her stomach and smiled at the misty green hills, completely oblivious to the empire burning in her wake. Her focus was entirely on the new life she was creating, one quiet choice, one steady breath, one courageous step at a time. 3 weeks after Amelia Thorne disappeared from New York City, a pregnant woman got off a coach bus in Stowe, Vermont. She was 7 months along, exhausted, and the roll of cash in her purse felt terrifyingly small. The journey had been a miserable blur of cramped seats and fluorescent-lit rest stops, but she had made it. Chloe Morgan was here. She took a small shuttle into the village, nestled in a valley where mountains kissed the sky. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and burning birch. Quaint colonial-style houses lined the narrow streets, and a gentle river flowed through the town's heart. It all felt quieter, slower, and infinitely more real than the steel canyons of Manhattan. Chloe was turned away by 3 different inns before the cruel reality hit her. They all demanded a credit card for incidentals. Cash, she quickly learned, made people nervous. Not without a photo ID that could be scanned, not without creating the very digital footprint she had worked so hard to wipe clean. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," the last innkeeper said, his tone genuinely apologetic. "It's just our policy for security." Chloe found a bench near the town green, her hand resting on her belly, trying to breathe through a rising tide of panic. She had planned for so much, but this simple, modern obstacle had never occurred to her. The baby stirred, a soft flutter beneath her ribs, and for the first time since she'd left, Chloe had no answer. That night, she slept in the old station wagon she'd bought with cash from a suspicious kid in Albany. The driver's seat was a cage for her aching pregnant body, a wave of nausea mixed with the cold mountain air that seeped through the windows. It was a horrific, waking dream. She wept without making a sound, her palm pressed against her stomach. "I'm so sorry, little guy," she whispered into the darkness. "I am so sorry. We will find a way, I promise." On the 3rd morning, desperate and near her breaking point, Chloe noticed a small diner on the main street. "Jean's Place," read the simple, faded sign. Taped inside the window, next to a list of pie specials, was another sign. "Restroom for customers only, but coffee is always free for those who need it." She went in, her only goal to use the bathroom, to feel a flicker of normalcy. The diner was cozy and warm, smelling of bacon and strong coffee. An older man with a weathered face and a thick apron watched her approach the counter. "You look like you've seen better days," the man said, his voice gruff. "Just passing through," Chloe muttered. "May I use your restroom?" "End of the counter on your left, miss. Help yourself." In the tiny bathroom, Chloe looked at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes bruised with fatigue, but she saw something else emerging. A resilience. She looked like a real person, not the curated, flawless wife she had been performing as for years. When she emerged, the man had a thick ceramic mug of black coffee waiting for her. "Figured you could use that. No charge." The simple act of kindness was the thing that finally undid her. The tears she'd fought for days began to stream down her face. Thank you. The man glanced over her shoulder, his eyes landing on the dusty station wagon, parked across the street. How many nights you been sleeping in that thing, kid? Chloe's eyes shot up. How could you possibly? The old man started wiping the counter. Kid, I was a line cook in Boston for 30 years before I bought this place. I know what desperation looks like. It's got a particular flavor. Name's Jean. Chloe, she whispered. Chloe Miller. Is that your real name? Chloe didn't answer. Jean just grunted. Good enough. You find a place to stay yet? Not yet, I'm trying. I got a spare room upstairs. It ain't the Ritz, but it's clean and it's warm. It's yours if you can handle waiting tables during the breakfast rush. Your work will cover your rent. Chloe stared at the gruff stranger offering a lifeline. Why would you do this for me? Because about 40 years ago, I was sleeping on a subway grate in the North End, he said, focusing on a spot on the counter. And a guy who owned a bakery gave me a chance, just settling a debt. His eyes met hers, tired but steady. You on the run from the police? No. I'm on the run from a man who thought I was one of his assets. That'll do, Jean grunted. Welcome to Stowe, Chloe. The room above the diner was small, containing only a bed, a nightstand, and a window that overlooked the sleepy main street and the towering mountains beyond. But it was hers. It was the first place that had belonged only to her in over 6 years. Chloe fell asleep, crying that night, but for the first time, they were tears of exhaustion, of hope, and of a raw, fragile gratitude. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm. Chloe worked the morning shift, pouring coffee, clearing plates, and talking with the local customers. She was starting to learn the rhythm of coastal life in Port Blossom. The townspeople were observant, but gave her space, noticing the fine wool of her worn coat, her quiet, polished manners, and the gentle curve of her growing belly. It's a funny thing about these little towns, Agnes, the bookstore owner, said one afternoon, polishing her spectacles behind the counter. We all know each other's stories, but we also know which pages to leave unturned. It's clear you're running from something, but it's just as clear you're not the running kind. That's good enough for us. At night, the terror returned. Marcus finding her, the suffocating silence of their New York penthouse. The image of him taking their child, forcing her back into a gilded cage she'd mistaken for a life. She'd wake with a gasp, a hand flying to her stomach, just to feel the solid, reassuring presence of her son, to know he was still there, still safe, still hers. Agnes heard her one night and brought up a cup of chamomile tea. The ghosts don't shout so loud with the ocean breeze, she said softly, but they sure do linger. I had my own share. It takes a good long while to believe you're truly out of their reach. What if he finds me? Eleanor whispered. Dear girl, you're a pregnant woman who disappeared into the coastline of Maine. That's like trying to find one particular grain of sand on 1,000 beaches. You are safe. In her second month in town, Eleanor met Zoe at a prenatal clinic. Zoe was 5 months along, her arms covered in intricate floral tattoos and a spirit as vivid as her lavender-dyed hair. First one? Zoe asked, settling onto the chair next to Eleanor. Yes. You? Third time's the charm, I hope. The father decided his cross-country van life wasn't exactly compatible with a nursery. The universe did me a favor, my mom always says. Eleanor let out a rusty laugh, a sound she barely recognized as her own. I'm on my own, too. Zoe's gaze was sharp and kind. Running from a ghost? Is it that obvious? Sweetie, I'm a potter. I see the fine details. That scarf is cashmere. Your accent is pure Upper East Side, and you jump a foot every time a car backfires. Zoe's smile was warm. Don't worry, I'm not prying. We're all carrying something. After their appointments, they grabbed tea and talked for hours about bizarre cravings, the overwhelming fear of raising a child alone, and the daunting task of starting a life from scratch. It was the most honest, open conversation Eleanor had had in years, the first time she'd felt like a person rather than a beautiful accessory. "You're good people, Ellie, no matter who you were before," Zoe said as they parted. "You should stick around. I'm planning on it." In her third month there, 9 months pregnant, a pipe burst behind a bookshelf during a fierce winter storm. Agnes called Leo Vance, the local park ranger who also served as the town's jack-of-all-trades. Leo arrived in a weathered pickup truck, wearing a flannel shirt with gentle eyes and a reassuring calm that instantly put Eleanor at ease. He fixed the leaking pipe, then noticed Eleanor struggling with a heavy box of newly arrived books. "You shouldn't be lifting that. Here, let me get it." Eleanor's immediate reaction was to assert her independence, but something in Leo's quiet strength made her step aside. "Thank you." As he worked, Leo spoke easily. He was a Port Blossom native. His wife had died in a car accident 2 years prior, leaving him to raise their daughter, Lily, by himself. He carved sculptures from driftwood in his spare time and seemed to know every soul in town. "I'm making a driftwood mobile for Zoe's baby," he mentioned. "I could make one for your little one, too. No cost. Every new baby in town deserves a proper welcome." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears, a sudden rush of hormones, and the pure shock of such simple, unconditional generosity. "Why would you do that?" Leo just smiled. "It's what we do here. We look out for our own. It's how a community is supposed to work." 2 weeks later, a historic nor'easter slammed the coast, burying Port Blossom in snow and closing every road. That night, Eleanor's water broke. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The contractions were relentless, and she was terrified and alone. She reached for the emergency radio they all kept. "It's happening. I'm on my way. Just breathe." But the snow was too deep for cars. Even the town's emergency plow was stuck. Zoe eventually arrived on snowshoes, a ghost in the swirling white. "Okay, Ellie, focus on me. We can do this." Agnes heard them and came up from her apartment downstairs. "I helped deliver my sister's first baby on the farm back in '81. Can't be all that different." Moments later, Leo appeared, having heard the call on his own radio. "My wife, we took a birthing class for a home birth. I remember most of it. I can help." And so Eleanor Hayes gave birth in a cozy apartment above a bookstore during a blizzard, surrounded by 3 people who had become her family in just a few short hours. Zoe coached her through her breathing, Agnes boiled water and sterilized towels, and Leo provided a quiet, anchoring presence, his calm voice guiding her through the worst of the pain. At 3:47 a.m., as snow piled high against the windows and the wind howled its ancient song, Caleb Hayes was born. 7 pounds and 3 ounces, healthy, beautiful, and free. Eleanor held him, sobbing with a joy so profound it was painful. "Hello, my love. Hello. You're safe. Mama's got you." Zoe was crying too. "He's perfect, Ellie." Leo came in with the small, elegant driftwood mobile he'd just finished. "Welcome to Port Blossom, little guy." Agnes put a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, her usual stoicism gone. "What's his name?" "Caleb. It means faithful and devoted, and it's a strong name." She looked at each of their faces. "He's already so much braver than I am." "Kid, you just delivered a baby in the middle of a nor'easter, without so much as an aspirin," Agnes said. "I think you've got bravery covered." The next 6 months were the most peaceful of Eleanor's life. She worked her shifts at the bookstore, with Caleb sleeping soundly in a sling against her chest. The town quietly, completely adopted them. Casseroles would appear on her doorstep, along with bags of outgrown baby clothes and endless offers to babysit. Zoe's daughter, Daisy, was born 6 months after Caleb. The two new mothers navigated parenthood together, forging a bond deeper than any friendship Eleanor had known in her polished New York life. They took their babies for walks along the rocky shore, spent evenings on Zoe's porch, and built a life founded on community and resilience. Leo was a frequent visitor, fixing things that didn't need fixing, bringing over fresh fish for dinner, and reading board books to Caleb. One evening, sitting around a beach bonfire, while Caleb slept in his carrier, Leo turned to her. "I don't know what you ran from, but it can't find you here." They were sitting so close, their arms were almost touching. He shifted slightly closer, and Eleanor felt the warmth, the pull, the temptation to lean in, but she pulled back. "Leo, I can't. I'm still, legally, it's a mess." "I can wait," he said, his voice simple and certain, "as long as it takes." "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because," he said, his eyes on the flames, "some things are worth waiting for." On Caleb's first birthday, it felt like the entire town showed up for the party in the little park overlooking the harbor. Daisy took her first wobbly steps toward Caleb. Agnes baked a cake shaped like a lighthouse. The local doctor gave Caleb a toy lobster. Zoe read a story she'd written just for him. Leo was teaching Caleb how to toss pebbles into the surf. Though at 1 year old, Caleb was more interested in putting them in his mouth. Eleanor watched him with Leo, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. That night, as she rocked Caleb to sleep, she sang him a soft lullaby. "Mama," Caleb said, his first real word. Eleanor hugged him tightly, tears of pure happiness tracing paths down her cheeks. "Yes, my sweet boy, Mama is here, always." She believed she had finally found it. Safety, a real home, a genuine peace. She believed the past was a ghost, left behind 2,000 miles away, buried under a new name and a new life, built on honesty instead of image. But in Manhattan, in a minimalist, glass-encased office overlooking Central Park, a private investigator named Fletcher was reviewing flagged intelligence. A human network that scoured regional publications had sent an alert. A small newspaper in Maine had run a feature on a local potter who won a state-level award. The photo showed the artist at her wheel, but in the slightly blurred background, a woman was holding a baby. Her bone structure was an undeniable match for Eleanor Thorne. Fletcher picked up his secure line. "Mr. Thorne, I believe we've found her." Eleanor's fragile, perfect world was on the verge of collapsing, because the past, as it turns out, is never truly buried. It only waits. 18 months after Eleanor vanished, Marcus Thorne sat in his therapist's office, sifting through the ruins of his own creation. He hadn't touched alcohol in over a year. He had appointed a new CEO to run Thorne Properties, stepping away from the relentless demands of the business. He was, as his therapist put it, examining the architecture of his failure. He was confronting the reasons a woman would need to flee a life of immense privilege to save herself. The sessions were brutal, forcing him to see his own suffocating control, the way he wielded his wealth like a shield, and the profound neglect he had always disguised as ambition. He had filled journals with unsent letters to Eleanor, packed with apologies that rang hollow even to him, and questions he knew he had no right to ask. "I thought giving her the world meant I was a good husband," Marcus confessed. "But I never gave her the one thing she actually wanted. I never even had the decency to ask what it was. And what do you think she wanted? To be seen. To be his partner, not his property." Marcus's voice cracked. "I treated her like my most prized acquisition. Now she's gone, and all I have is this empty penthouse and the crushing certainty that I destroyed the only authentic thing I ever had. His phone buzzed during that very session. Fletcher's name appeared on the screen. Marcus's heart began to pound as he answered. Yes? Port Blossom, Maine. She has a son. He's healthy, about 18 months old. His name is Caleb. Marcus's carefully reconstructed world shattered. You have confirmation? The birth certificate, sir. The founding date of the school matches her due date. What's your play, Damien? Evelyn, his chief counsel, spoke calmly from across the vast expanse of his San Francisco office. She mouthed the words, "Be smart." But Damien Sterling wasn't listening. That was his daughter. Somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, a little girl with his eyes, a life he'd been completely shut out of. Find her, he commanded his head of security over the phone. The school's address, the name she's using, who she's with, everything. Damien, Evelyn interjected, her tone firm. We've been through this. A knee-jerk reaction is the worst possible move. You're not prepared for this. But Damien had already hung up, pulling up flight manifests to Aspen on a transparent screen. 3 years of court-ordered anger management, of meticulously rebuilding his public image. It was all turning to ash. That's my child. I've missed her entire life. I'm prepared. He was not prepared. 2 days later, Damien sat in a gleaming black Escalade outside a charming log cabin building named Harmony Creek Music School. His security team had been brutally effective. Chloe was now Claire Evans. She had a new business, a new community, a new life, and a new man. Damien watched as Claire emerged, holding a little girl's hand, smiling at something a man in hiking gear was saying. The man had a warm, rugged look, a natural ease with her that made Damien's grip tighten on the steering wheel until his knuckles were bone white. Then he saw the girl's face, Chloe's soft brown hair, but his own unmistakable storm gray eyes. The toddler pointed a tiny finger at the man and squealed, "Papa, Mark!" Damien's perfectly ordered world shattered. His daughter called another man, "Papa." They walked toward the town square, and Damien followed, keeping a careful distance. He watched this stranger lift his daughter onto his broad shoulders, watched Claire beam with a genuine, unburdened joy he hadn't witnessed in half a decade. They looked like a family, a postcard-perfect mountain family, the kind he'd only ever seen in lifestyle magazines he secretly despised. That night, in the sterile luxury of his hotel suite, Damien shattered 3 years of discipline with a $300 bottle of whiskey and a call to his top lawyer. Draft the paperwork. I want full custody, immediately. Damien, we've discussed the optics. A mother leaving before the child is born gives her enormous legal standing. It's not viewed as abduction. I don't give a damn. She's living under a fraudulent name. She concealed my heir from me. I have the resources, the PR firm, the best legal minds in the country. She runs a children's music class and a glorified shed. Get me my daughter. The lawyer sighed wearily. I'll start the process. But Damien, be warned. This kind of scorched earth litigation, it can burn you too. Just do it. The next morning, Damien strode into the music school. An elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a tweed jacket looked up from the reception desk. His smile was pleasant, but guarded. May I help you? I'm here to see Claire Evans. The ice in Damien's tone made the older man's friendly posture stiffen instantly. And who shall I say is asking? Someone she knows. Claire appeared from a back room, a little girl named Lily trailing beside her. Then she saw Damien. The planet seemed to stop turning. Every drop of color drained from her face as she instinctively swept Lily up into a fierce, protective hug. Mommy, who is that man? Lily's small voice picked up on the sudden chill in the room. Alistair, would you please take Lily to get some hot chocolate? Now, the man, Alistair, recognized the imminent threat in Damien's stance. Of course. Come along, little songbird. Let's go find the ones with extra marshmallows. Lily started to protest. But, Mommy... Alistair was already steering her toward the door, leaving Claire and Damien alone in the suddenly silent room. The air crackled with 7 years of history, 3 years of acrimony, and the unbridgeable gulf between them. Damien finally broke the silence. Hello, Chloe. Don't use that name, she whispered. What are you doing here, Damien? I came to meet my daughter, the one you stole from me. Claire's eyes flashed with fire. I didn't steal her, I saved her. Saved her from what? A father who could give her the world? Claire let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You wouldn't have given her the world. You would have given her a line item in your portfolio, an heir for Sterling Industries. Did you even know I was pregnant with a girl? Did you know her due date? Did you care? That's not fair. Fair? Claire's voice trembled with fury. You missed every single ultrasound because you were closing a deal in another country. You were with your assistant while I was home, sick and alone. Don't you dare lecture me on what's fair. Damien swiped open his tablet, displaying a legal document. These are custody papers. I'm suing for sole and primary custody. The floor seemed to vanish from under Claire's feet. You can't. I can, and I will. You committed identity fraud. You engaged in parental interference. I have a legal team that costs more per hour than this entire town's annual budget. What do you have? A piano and a fake name. Claire's hands were shaking, but she stood her ground. I have her. I have Lily. And she doesn't know you. She doesn't need you. She calls another man Papa. My daughter calls another man Papa because Marcus has been here. Marcus is the one who reads her stories at night. Marcus is the one who bandages her knees when she falls. Marcus is her father in every single way that actually counts. Damien's face was a mask of cold fury. Not in the eyes of the law. Legally, she is a Sterling, and I am taking her back to San Francisco. Over my dead body. See you in court, Chloe. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Claire trembling in the wreckage of the world she'd so carefully built. She stumbled back, her knees buckling, and she collapsed into a heap, sobbing. Alistair rushed back in, kneeling beside her. What happened, my dear? He found us, she wept. He's taking Lily. He's going to take my baby away. The official documents were served a few days later. They demanded full physical and legal custody be granted to Damien Sterling, the immediate relocation of the child to San Francisco, and stipulated that Claire Evans would be permitted, at the court's discretion, supervised visitation only. The petition cited parental alienation, identity fraud, and custodial interference. A major tech blog broke the story. Silicon Valley titan Damien Sterling discovers secret daughter hidden in Colorado. The story, crafted by Damien's PR team, painted Claire as an unstable grifter. The narrative poisoned the small mountain town against her almost instantly. She lied to all of us. She was using a fake name the whole time. Parents at the town playground steered their children away when Lily approached. The school's phone buzzed with parents canceling lessons. Her landlord gave her an eviction notice. Her friends, Marcus and Alistair, stood by her, but the rest of the town treated her like a leper. Claire began packing boxes, ready to run again. And where will you go? Marcus asked gently. I don't know. Somewhere he won't think to look. Marcus took her hands firmly. He found you with facial recognition software, Claire. He'll find you again. You can't keep running. Then what do I do? You fight, Marcus said, his voice resolute. You plant your feet right here, and you fight for your daughter. Alistair appeared in the doorway, holding a worn-out briefcase. I'm officially unretiring. Claire looked at him, completely bewildered. What are you talking about? For 30 years, I was a professor of contract law at Stanford. But my sister was the best family law litigator in Denver. She owes me. Now stop packing and let's prepare our argument. Over the next few weeks, Alastair and his sister, Eleanor, became a formidable team. They gathered evidence, deposed witnesses, and built a meticulous timeline of Damien's staggering, emotional abandonment. The local obstetrician provided records showing Claire attended every prenatal visit alone. Marcus and other locals agreed to testify to her character and devotion as a mother. Slowly, as the true narrative began to surface, the community started to realize Claire hadn't been a liar escaping justice. She'd been a refugee escaping a prison of gold. The custody hearing was held in the county courthouse. Damien arrived with a team of 6 lawyers in $1,000 suits. Claire's legal counsel consisted of Eleanor, a woman in her late 60s with a single, battered legal pad. Damien's lead attorney launched a devastating opening. Your Honor, Damien Sterling is a dedicated father who was robbed of his fundamental right to know his child. He was the victim of a calculated, cruel deception by a woman who fled, fabricated an identity, and has spent 3 years alienating his daughter from him. We are here to restore his rights. The court was here today to correct this profound injustice. Witnesses testified to Damien's reformed character. His therapist spoke of his personal evolution. A member of his company's board praised his new family-oriented focus. A child psychologist detailed the unparalleled opportunities and resources a child would have under Mr. Sterling's care. The evidence against Claire seemed insurmountable. The secret bank account she'd opened, the apartment leased under a false name, the birth certificate that left the father's name blank. Photos of her laughing with Marcus were presented as proof she had callously moved on. By the end of the second day, Claire whispered to Eleanor, "We're going to lose her." Eleanor patted her hand. "It is only day 2. Trust the strategy." On day 3, Eleanor called her own witnesses, Marcus, Alastair, the town doctor. They all painted a vivid, consistent portrait of Claire as a loving, resilient mother who had built a secure and nurturing home from nothing. Damien's lawyers objected to every word, dismissing it as irrelevant character testimony against the hard legal facts of her fraud. Then Claire took the stand. "Ms. Evans," Eleanor began, pointedly using her chosen name, "why did you leave your husband?" Claire looked directly at Damien, her voice unwavering. "Because in his world, I was becoming a ghost. I was disappearing, and I refused to let my child disappear with me." She then described the slow, painful disintegration of their marriage. The appointments he missed for product launches, the thinly veiled affair with his executive assistant, the casual cruelty of a man who had long since stopped seeing her as a person. Eleanor presented Damien's own encrypted calendar as evidence, showing he was on a different continent for 11 of Claire's prenatal checkups. His text message, logs, showed only 3 inquiries about the pregnancy over 9 months. Hotel and airline receipts told the rest of the story. "I didn't leave to punish him," Claire said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "I left to save myself and to save my daughter from a life of bottomless, emotional neglect." Damien's lawyer's cross-examination was vicious, hammering on the lies, the fake name, the theft of a father-daughter relationship. But Claire was unbreakable. "I used my mother's maiden name, and I paid for everything with my own money, from a trust my grandmother left me. I have never taken a single penny from him." That's a lie, not neglect. I begged him to come to the ultrasounds, but a merger was always more important. And Sam showed up. He showed up because my son deserved a father. Leo calls him Dada because Sam is there when he wakes up and when he goes to sleep. That's what being a father is. On the fifth day, Chloe's lawyer called an unexpected witness. Marcus Thorne, Arthur Lexington's longtime CFO, entered the courtroom, and the blood drained from Arthur's face. Mr. Thorne, what is your relationship to Arthur Lexington? He's the son of my oldest friend. I've known him his entire life. Marcus then described the all-consuming nature of the Lexington Empire, recounting how Arthur's own father had a heart attack in his office and refused to go to the hospital until the markets closed. Arthur missed anniversaries, birthdays, and his own mother's final moments, all in the pursuit of another deal. That emotional detachment was the cornerstone of his success. When Arthur called me about Leo, Marcus said, his voice heavy with disappointment, he didn't say, "I'm going to be a father." He said, "I need you to set up a second trust. There's a complication." That one phrase tells you everything about the man he was. Arthur stared at the man who was like an uncle to him, his face a canvas of betrayal. Marcus refused to meet his eye. Then Arthur shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I need to say something." His own attorney whispered fiercely, "Arthur, sit down." But Arthur was done with strategies, with lawyers, with fighting. He's right. Marcus is right about all of it. He turned to Chloe, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. "I didn't lose a wife. I drove her away. I didn't lose a son. I never deserved him in the first place." His voice cracked. "You were right to leave. I would have destroyed him, just like I destroyed us." The courtroom fell into a profound silence. In the back row, Isabella Vance, the architect, watched in disbelief. She had come to see Chloe ruined, to see Arthur claim his heir. Instead, she was watching him capitulate, admitting to the entire world that his life had been a catastrophic failure. "I came here to take my son back to New York," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But that's not what he needs." Arthur addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I am withdrawing my petition for sole custody. I am not trying to take Leo from his mother. I am hoping to earn the privilege of being his father, if she'll let me." He looked at Chloe. "And if she won't, I understand." The judge declared a recess. Upon her return, her verdict was clear and measured. Joint legal custody is established. Primary physical custody is awarded to Chloe Sullivan. Arthur Lexington is granted graduated visitation, starting with supervised sessions and moving to unsupervised weekends after 1 year of consistent, verified attendance at family counseling and parenting classes. All financial support will be placed in a trust for Leo's education. She then looked squarely at Arthur. "Mr. Lexington, your son has no idea who you are. Fatherhood is built on your time, not your dime. You have an opportunity to build a relationship." "Do not waste it," Chloe cried, tears of pure relief streaming down her face. Arthur simply nodded, accepting the terms. The architect, who had come to witness Chloe's destruction, slipped out of the courtroom, her own future in tatters. The battle was over. The quiet, difficult work of rebuilding was just beginning. The community center playroom smelled faintly of bleach and crayons. A social worker named Maria sat in a small plastic chair, scrolling through her phone, the appointed supervisor for Arthur Lexington's first visit with his son. Chloe lingered near the doorway, a tight knot of fear in her chest, unable to watch, but too afraid to leave. Arthur arrived exactly on schedule, carrying several large bags from a luxury children's boutique, a cashmere baby blanket, a handcrafted wooden rocking horse, a tablet preloaded with educational apps. Leo, now 2, took one look at the tall man in the expensive suit and hid behind Chloe's legs. "No," Leo said with certainty. "My Dada." Chloe knelt down to her son's level. "This is Arthur. He's your—" She searched for the word. "He's your first father. I have Dada. Dada Sam." The name hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. All his power, all his money, and his son had just erased him with three small words. Maria glanced up from her phone. "Mr. Lexington, lose the presents, get on the floor." Arthur was baffled. "And do what?" "Just be there. That's the job." So Arthur, in his $2,000 suit, sat on the faded alphabet rug, surrounded by worn-out blocks and toy cars, feeling like an absolute fool. Leo ignored him, trying to fit a star-shaped block into a square-shaped hole. "That's a tricky one," Arthur offered. Leo shot him a suspicious look. "My puzzle." "Can I show you a trick?" Leo considered it. "Okay." For the next 50 minutes, they sat together, sorting shapes and building a lopsided tower. Arthur found himself making a vroom, vroom sound for a little blue car, and was startled by how natural it felt. Leo let out a peal of laughter, a pure, happy sound that felt like it stitched a piece of Arthur's broken soul back together. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Arthur felt a flicker of hope. When the hour was up, Leo offered a tiny wave. It was just a brief wiggle of his fingers, but it felt like a breakthrough. "He laughed," Arthur said to Maria, his voice thick. "He actually laughed with me." Maria offered a small smile. "Because you were present. Keep being present." For the next 3 months, Arthur was present every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 hours, supervised by Maria or another counselor. He learned how to read picture books with silly voices, how to build magnificent Lego towers just to have them smashed to bits, and how to understand that Leo was more fascinated by the cardboard box than the $500 toy that came in it. He sold his Manhattan penthouse and bought a simple 3-bedroom house just outside Burlington, Vermont, whose walls he started to paper with Leo's crayon drawings. He managed his empire remotely, and was shocked to find he didn't miss the boardroom at all. He attended every therapy session, learning how to listen rather than issue directives. He joined a parenting group where he was the oldest father by 20 years and the only one who showed up with a driver. "Why are you even here?" a young mom asked him once. "You could hire an army of nannies." "Because I have to learn how to do it right," he answered honestly. "You can't delegate being a dad." By the 6th month, he had graduated to unsupervised day visits. He would drive into Burlington to pick Leo up from the small house Chloe rented above her bookstore. They'd go to the park, by the lake, or get maple creamies, and sometimes they'd just stay home and make pancakes. "Your pancakes aren't as burnt anymore, Daddy Arthur," Leo declared one Saturday. Daddy Arthur. It wasn't just Daddy, not yet, but it was a name, a title he was starting to earn. Arthur cried in his car on the way back to his empty house before calling his therapist. He called me Daddy Arthur. How did that make you feel? Like I was finally given a key to a door I thought was locked forever, and I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of it. Chloe watched his metamorphosis from a safe distance. It would have been easier to hold onto her rage, but she couldn't deny the consistent, genuine change. He came to Leo's soccer practices and sat on the bleachers with Sam, the two men who loved her son, forging a quiet, respectful peace. "He's not who he was," Sam observed one evening, as they watched Arthur patiently show Leo how to tie his shoes. "People can change," Chloe said, "if they want to badly enough. Does that make up for what he did?" "No, but it changes what happens next." Sam took her hand. "Chloe, we've been doing this slow dance for 3 years. I love you, and I love that boy like my own. I want to be your husband and his father, but I need to know if you're ready for that." Chloe looked at the kind, patient man. He had shown up in the middle of a blizzard with a generator, built the bookshelves for her store with his own 2 hands, and had been her rock every single day without asking for a thing in return. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm ready." 3 years after the court decision, Chloe and Sam were married on a hill overlooking Lake Champlain. Leo, carefully holding the rings, was the best man. A handful of close friends were witnesses, and Arthur sat in a chair next to his partner, Jennifer, a kind-hearted veterinarian he'd met when his new puppy got sick. He watched them exchange vows with a genuine smile on his face. At the casual reception at a local brewery, Arthur found Chloe. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For not locking me out. For giving me a chance to earn my place." Chloe smiled. "You did the earning, Arthur. You just kept showing up. That's all it ever took." Leo ran over, grabbing a hand from each of them. "Daddies, come dance." 2 daddies. Both there, both earned, both loved. Chloe thought of the woman she had been, pregnant and hiding in a motel room, terrified of the future. She thought of giving birth in a strange town, supported by a man who became her family. She thought of the long road from Chloe Lexington to Chloe Sullivan, from being an accessory to being her own person, from a gilded cage in the sky to a messy, wonderful, real freedom on the ground. She had found it. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but a true one. And a true life, she now understood, was invaluable. 3 years after the court decision, Isabella Vance stood across the street from Chloe's bookstore, the next chapter, trying to summon a fraction of the ruthless confidence she once commanded. She wore an off-the-rack coat, a world away from the custom-tailored power suits of her past. Her hair, once a statement of expensive highlights, was now its natural color, threaded with gray. Her nails, once perfectly manicured, were chewed and uneven. Her world imploded the day Damian Sterling, the real estate titan, pulled his entire portfolio from the art gallery she curated. In the incestuous world of New York's art scene, the gossip was toxic and swift. The curator who tried to blackmail a billionaire, who used an affair as leverage, who interfered in a high-profile marriage. She was a pariah. She tried to sue Damian for damages, but her lawyer just sighed. "On what grounds?" "He terminated your contract for ethical violations. You have nothing." Her savings were vaporized by the legal battle. She lost her Soho loft, sold her personal collection for a fraction of its worth, and eventually had to retreat to her parents' house in a New Jersey suburb she'd fought for 2 decades to escape. She got a job as a style consultant at a high-end department store, advising women on accessories with a vacant smile. The woman who was nearly the next Mrs. Sterling was now earning commission on handbags. But that morning, she saw Clara's face in an architecture journal. Charleston Preservationist wins acclaimed Heritage Award. Clara looked poised, brilliant, and content. She was everything Isabel had once been and had set on fire herself. Clara walked out of her design studio, hand in hand with her son Leo, now 5 years old, who was chattering about a model volcano from his kindergarten class. She stopped cold when she saw Isabel. "Leo, sweetie, go inside with Maria. Mommy will be right there." The boy scurried in, and Clara folded her arms, her expression unreadable as she faced the woman who had tried to obliterate her life. "Clara, please, just 5 minutes." Clara's face was like carved marble. "You have 2. Isabel's story came out in a raw, frantic cascade. The blacklisting, the professional ruin, the humiliating freefall. I lost everything. And you want my sympathy? No. I want you to understand. We both wanted the same thing." Clara let out a short, sharp laugh. "We wanted nothing of the kind. We both wanted to make our mark. Isabel insisted to be more than just girls from the suburbs. You chose the long road the right way. I took a shortcut. You chose to systematically erase another woman to take what you wanted. That's not ambition. That's demolition." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I know I see that now, and I am so sorry for all of it." The silence hung heavy and humid between them. Clara remembered the hidden layer in the penthouse blueprints, the one labeled Phase 2. The cold, calculated plans to replace her life with Isabel's. So why are you in Charleston? Isabel, I saw you in the magazine. You're thriving. You have this life, you designed yourself with integrity. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. What you did took more strength than any boardroom maneuver I ever plotted. Clara studied this ghost of a woman, a shell of the rival she once knew. There's a foundation a few blocks from here. They teach construction trades to women escaping abusive homes. They need someone to build their corporate fundraising program. Pro bono. Isabel stared at her. Well, it's volunteer work, but if you build something real for them, I'll give you a stellar reference. Why would you help me? Because someone helped me when I was lost, and because you're young enough to draw a new blueprint for your life, if you really want to. Isabel's tears finally broke free. I don't deserve it, no, Clara agreed. You don't, but do it anyway. Not for me, for the next woman who feels trapped. Help her build a foundation instead of trying to tear hers down. Clara walked away, leaving Isabel holding a business card for the Ansonborough project 2 weeks later. Isabel stood in a small office with a strategic plan she'd drafted on a library computer. The director reviewed it carefully. Miss Vance, this is masterful. Strategic professional. Exactly what we need. Thank you. I want this to be a place where women find financial security, where they can rebuild their lives. Clara Hayes sent you to us, she said. You were a project worth restoring. Isabel's throat tightened. She was far more gracious than I had any right to expect. Then earn that grace. Isabel looked at the plans, at the framework for the Ansonborough project, a place to start over. Okay, I will earn it at the community oyster roast that evening. The sprawling chosen family was all there. Miguel and his husband with their daughter Theo, the novelist knitting in a lawn chair, Ben teaching Leo and his friend to skip stones, Julian and his new partner Catherine playing with the kids. Clara sat watching them all, her true foundation, her real home. Miguel settled onto the blanket beside her. You happy? Yeah, I really am. 5 years ago, you were sleeping on my couch with drywall dust in your hair. It feels like it happened to someone else. That's because you're a completely different architect. Clara shook her head. No, I'm the same person. I was all along. I just finally found the right site to build on. Damien approached Leo, running ahead to show Clara a perfect seashell. After Leo ran back to Ben Damien, lingered, he's an amazing kid. He said he is. You did that. You're raising him to be creative and happy and free. We're all doing it together. All of us. Can I ask you a question, Damien? Waited for her nod. Do you ever regret it walking away? Clara looked at Leo, laughing with Ben at Miguel, with his husband at Theo, discussing a book, at this life she had designed, from the ground up, from courage and friendship. Not for a single second. I regret that it was necessary, but I will never regret the decision I do. I regret every single thing I did that made you feel you had no other choice. I know, but you're different now, too. And that counts for something. Leo called out. Mama Daddy. Damien, come see. They walked over together to their messy, complicated, wonderful family. 2 dads for Leo, both of whom earned that title through their actions, a mother who had saved herself and her son, and a village that had decided to be a family. The sun set over the South Carolina lowcountry, painting the sky coral and indigo. Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known in the Manhattan penthouse with its panoramic city views. This was real, flawed, and tangible, and completely her own design. Theo caught her eye from across the lawn and raised his glass of sweet tea in a silent toast to women who draw their own damn blueprints, to communities that rise to the occasion, to second chances that are earned, not given, Clara raised her own glass and returned to courage, to choosing truth over comfort, to walking away, when it's the only path that leads you back to your own design. The sound of cicadas filled the air. Leo's laughter echoed in the warm twilight, and Clara Hayes, formerly Mrs. Damian Sterling, finally knew she was home the next morning. Clara stood in her sunlit studio, sharpening a drafting pencil. The early light streamed through the large windows, overlooking the street. The same street she'd once walked down, feeling lost and terrified. She had come so far. Her project board was full. 3 historic home consultations, 2 commercial restoration bids, and 1 woman who needed help leaving a dangerous marriage. This was the work she was always meant to do, the woman she was always meant to be. The front bell chimed. A woman entered, maybe 30, with a bruised cheek. She tried to hide with her hair and a toddler on her hip. Clara recognized the look, the fear mixed with resolve, the way she held her child like a shield, the profound exhaustion that comes from living on constant alert. "Can I help you?" Clara asked softly. The woman's voice was a whisper. "I need to disappear. I need a new plan, but I have no idea where to start." Clara walked to the shelf behind her desk and pulled down a small framed blueprint, her own simple list from 5 years ago, the one she'd sketched on a napkin before leaving Damien's penthouse. Go bag, cash train, ticket, burner phone, new bank account. She showed it to the woman. "This was my first draft 5 years ago. It worked." The woman stared at the paper, then at the bright, successful studio around her, at the life Clara had built. "You really did it." Clara gestured to everything, her business license on the wall, photos of Leo on her desk. The life she'd designed with her own 2 hands. "I'm here, aren't I? Can you help me? That's exactly why I'm here." Clara pulled out a fresh sheet of drafting paper, the same kind she'd used to plan her own new life. "Let's start with your foundation. First, what's your name?" Jessica Sanchez." Clara began sketching years of experience and personal history, combining into a roadmap to freedom. "Okay, Jessica, let's design you an escape plan for the next 2 hours." Clara walked Jessica through every detail: secure communication apps, cash-only jobs that wouldn't leave a paper trail, community networks for housing documents needed for a fresh start, small towns with strong support systems, resources, and opportunities. "The first 24 hours are the hardest part of the build," Clara said. "You'll doubt yourself 1,000 times, but remember, you're not demolishing your life. You're renovating it. You're building toward safety, toward who you're meant to be." Jessica held her daughter closer. "What if he comes after me? Then you'll have a whole crew of people to protect you. That's how this works. You draw the plans, but you find out you're not building it alone." Clara handed her a folder. "This has everything you need: numbers for hotlines, shelters in 3 different states, job resources, and my personal cell phone number. You can call me whenever you need to, day or night. What do I owe you for this?" "Nothing. Someone gave me the tools to start for free. Now I'm paying it forward." After Jessica left, Clara sat at a drafting table for a long moment, feeling the echo of the past 5 years ago. She had been the one on the other side of a desk, desperate for an escape route. Now she was the one drawing the map. The circle was closing. Miguel appeared in the doorway, with coffee. "Another one, yes, she reminds me of me, scared but ready." "You're doing good work, Clara." "I'm doing the work I was always supposed to do." That evening, Clara went to Leo's school. Art fair. The town green was buzzing with their found family. Liam and Sam, Chloe and her wife with little Noah, Daniel with his ever-present lump of clay, and Richard with his new partner, Eleanor, both cheering when Finn's model of the covered bridge wobbled and collapsed. Everyone applauded anyway, including Finn, who thought the disaster was hysterical. Ava's heart felt full, watching her son enjoy a childhood so different from the one Richard would have orchestrated in Boston. Here, Finn was allowed to be imperfect, to try and fail, to just be a kid. After the festival, they all went for maple creamies. Finn sat between his two fathers, sizing up his chances for a second cone. "Papa Liam, can we get another one?" Liam chuckled. "Ask your mom. Mama says one is plenty," Ava said with a grin. Finn pivoted to Richard with wide, hopeful eyes. "Dad, can you say yes?" Richard glanced at Ava, and they shared a brief, united front. "Nice try, buddy. One cone." Finn heaved a dramatic sigh. Totally worth a shot. Later, as they walked to their cars, Richard fell into step beside Ava. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "You thank me every time you visit. You can stop." "I'm not thanking you for your pity," he clarified. "I'm thanking you for showing me what a real foundation looks like." Ava paused. "What do you mean?" "This." Richard gestured to the group ahead, Finn and Noah chasing each other across the grass, Liam and Eleanor talking easily, Sam and Daniel playfully arguing about joinery techniques. "You built this, a structure of people who support each other. I grew up with business contacts and strategic partnerships. You showed me what a real community is. It took me a while to find the right materials myself, but you did. And you didn't just save yourself and Finn, you saved me. By leaving, you forced me to look at the man I was. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that. You've thanked me by becoming a man Finn can admire. That's more than enough." That night, tucking Finn into bed in their cozy apartment above the bookstore, with its well-worn furniture and the scent of old paper, Ava felt a sense of wealth that money could never build. Finn was safe, cared for, and cherished. The bills were handled. Tomorrow, she'd help another woman draw up her own escape plan. Sam would fix the creaky floorboard in the hall. They'd have dinner with friends. It was simple and solid, and it was everything. "Mama," Finn said sleepily, "tell me the story again." "Which story, sweetheart? About when you were an architect." Ava smiled, stroking his hair. "Once upon a time, there was a woman who forgot her own blueprints. She lived in a polished glass skyscraper in a big city, but her own life felt empty. Then she discovered a new life was being built inside her, and she knew she needed a stronger foundation. So one morning, before the city woke up, she walked away from the skyscraper and drove north to find a place where they could both be truly whole. And she found Woodstock," Finn finished, having learned the story by heart. She found Woodstock, and Aunt Chloe, and Uncle Sam, and Papa Liam. And later, Dad Richard found them too, and learned how to build better things in his own way. "I'm glad you had a good blueprint, Mommy." "Me too, my love. Me too." After Finn fell asleep, Ava stood at the window. She looked out at the historic street, the sturdy brick buildings, the quiet Vermont town that had become her refuge. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "I did it. I submitted my resignation. I'm terrified, but I'm free." "Thank you." Ava typed back, "You are going to build something incredible. And when you're ready, you'll help the next woman who needs a hand. That's how we build our network. That's how we win." She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, Ava Sterling, the quiet architectural historian behind a development titan, living in a gilded cage and slowly being erased from her own life's design. She had believed that leaving was a sign of professional failure. Now she knew it was the bravest restoration project she had ever undertaken. Walking away isn't demolition. Sometimes it's the only way to rediscover the original structure. Ava had walked away from the trust fund, from the security, from the life everyone in Boston society thought she should want. In doing so, she had found everything she truly needed: purpose, community, love that wasn't tied to quarterly earnings, and a life built on her own terms, under her own name. The past couldn't be unbuilt. Richard would always be the man who designed a secret penthouse for another woman. But the future was her blueprint to draw, and she was drafting it one day at a time, one client at a time, one woman at a time. She was teaching them what she had learned in the darkest hours of that drive up the coast. You are more capable than you know. You deserve to sign your own plans. You deserve to take up space in your own life. And if you have to tear down your old world to find yourself, then grab a sledgehammer. Run toward authenticity. Run toward yourself. And on the other side, there will be people waiting. A bookstore owner with an apartment to spare, a friend who sees your true worth, a man who shows up with a warm meal on a cold night, a community that asks no questions but offers everything. You don't have to be Mrs. Sterling to matter. You just have to be yourself. Ava Thorne, formerly Ava Sterling, turned from the window and went to bed. Tomorrow she would help a local library secure a historical preservation grant. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in a home that was hers, in a life she had built, with a son who was free. The pregnant wife had vanished, but the woman she had become, she was just breaking ground on phase 2. 5 years to the day after Ava Sterling disappeared from Boston, Ava Thorne sat in a park in Woodstock, watching Finn build a sandcastle with his friend Noah. The morning fog was lifting, revealing the kind of Vermont day that made people reinvent their lives. Margaret settled onto the bench beside her, still sharp at 78, her hands busy knitting a tiny sweater, thinking deep thoughts, thinking about anniversaries. 5 years today. Any regrets? Ava watched Finn laugh as a wave of sand washed over his castle. He immediately started rebuilding, resilient and joyful. Not a single one. Good. Because that architect you helped last month, Sophie, she called me yesterday. She made it to Charleston. She's safe. She wanted me to tell you thank you. Ava smiled. Tell her to call me in a year, and tell me her restoration firm is thriving. That's the real thank you. Over the past 5 years, Ava had helped 27 women relaunch their careers. 27 women who had walked into her consultancy feeling demolished and walked out with a new blueprint, with hope, with the knowledge that someone understood. She kept a secure file with just their first names and the dates they left their old lives. A record of courage, of survival, of the underground network for women escaping toxic professional environments. Some came back to thank her. Some she never heard from again, which was fine, which was the point. They had become someone new, somewhere new, just like she had. Her historic preservation practice had grown. She'd hired 2 associates, both women with their own stories of leaving the corporate world behind. Sam managed their on-site assessments, his decades of carpentry experience perfect for their 47 active restoration projects. They specialized in historical integrity reports, grant writing for nonprofits, and what they privately called personal life renovations. Richard called it Ava's Rebellion. She called it paying it forward. Liam walked across the park from his gallery, now a successful landscape photographer. Noah trailed behind, 11 years old, and already a talented sketch artist. They had been married for 2 years, a small ceremony in the autumn hills with Finn as ring architect and half the town in attendance. Dinner's ready, Liam said, dropping a kiss on Ava's head. Your mom called. She's coming to visit next month. Helen, now 63 and retired from teaching history, visited twice a year. She and Margaret had become fast friends. 2 women who had reinvented themselves in different eras, bonded by a shared resilience. Did she say how long? 2 weeks. She wants to be here for Finn's birthday. Finn, hearing this, ran over, sandy and happy. Grandma Helen is coming? Can she tell me more stories about when Mommy used to dig up old stuff in the yard? Ava laughed. I'm sure she'll tell you every embarrassing story she can remember. They walked back to the house, this wonderful blended family they had constructed. Not traditional, not what anyone would have predicted, but theirs. Real and messy, and full of love. That afternoon, Richard arrived for his weekend with Finn. He had fully relocated to Vermont now, selling his Boston penthouse entirely. Isabel was gone, and he was with someone new. They were expecting a baby in 3 months. They had asked Ava and Liam to be the child's guardians, a request that had moved Ava to tears. Ready, bud? Richard asked Finn. Can I bring my sketchbook, Dad? I want to show you the treehouse design I'm working on. Richard glanced at Ava, who nodded permission. Sure. Just text me when you get to my place. Thank you, Finn said seriously, practicing his manners. Ava watched them drive away, her son secure in the knowledge that he was loved by many adults, that family wasn't limited by biology, that he was safe. You okay? Liam asked, his arm around her waist. Ava sighed. Yeah, just thinking about how different the architecture of my life is now. Different good or different bad. Different miraculous. That evening, Ava gave a talk at a local university's architectural preservation program, offering free carpentry training for women escaping controlling relationships. The Haven workshop had been running for a year. It was beautiful, smelling of sawdust and sea salt, with large workbenches that invited collaboration. Chloe was there now, the workshop's main benefactor, observing the program she helped fund. She and Nora weren't friends and never would be, but they had established a fragile peace. Chloe was making her amends, rebuilding her own integrity, one donation at a time. Thank you all for being here, Nora started, addressing the 24 women gathered in the main workshop of the Haven. 5 years ago, I was sitting right where you are, terrified, lost, and wondering if I was throwing my entire life away. She shared a simplified version of her past, avoiding the specific details that would identify her as Nora Ashworth, just the essential framework. A marriage that felt like a masterpiece but was actually a prison, a pregnancy that became a countdown to escape, and a disappearance that led to a complete reinvention. I won't pretend it was easy. The first few months in Portland were the hardest I've ever known. I burned through my savings. I cried myself to sleep every night. I questioned every single choice, Nora confessed. But I kept building. I made little wooden toys in my motel room, and I met people who helped me. A diner owner who had a room for rent, a retired shipwright who became my mentor, a coastal community that decided to take me in. One woman raised a hesitant hand. How did you know you were doing the right thing? I didn't, not for a long time. But then my daughter was born, and I held her, and knew I would rather be a self-employed woodworker smelling of varnish than a celebrated architect in a gilded cage. I would rather struggle and create something with my own hands than be comfortable and be a ghost. What if he comes after you? Another woman asked, her voice trembling. Then you have a network that stands with you. You have legal resources. You have a community of women who have walked this path and made it to the other side. You are not alone. That's the most important lesson I learned. You are not alone. After her talk, women crowded around her with questions, with words of gratitude, with fragments of their own stories. Nora listened to every single one, offering advice, connecting them with resources, and sharing her hope. She vividly remembered being on the other side, being the frightened woman asking if it was truly possible to leave. Now, she was the living answer to that question. Yes, leaving is possible. Freedom is possible. You are possible. At 11 p.m., Nora drove home along the dark coastal highway, the Pacific Ocean, invisible, but immense, a huge, breathing presence in the night. She thought about all the versions of herself she had been, the ambitious architect who believed in creating beautiful spaces, the young wife who thought her partnership was built on mutual respect, the ghost of a Nob Hill mansion whose own opinions were slowly being designed out of existence, the woman sleeping in a cheap motel, terrified but determined, the mother who gave birth during a winter storm, the artisan who saved herself by learning to build anew. All of those women were still inside her, the frightened ones and the fierce ones, the cracked foundations and the final sturdy structure. She was a cathedral of resilience, a library of hard-won knowledge, a monument to the power of walking away and building something new. At home, her husband Liam was awake, sketching boat designs in a notebook. He looked up as she came in. "How'd it go?" "Good. Difficult, but good." "You're changing lives, Nora." "I'm just showing them the tools are within their reach. They're doing all the heavy lifting." Liam pulled her into a hug. "You are truly incredible, Nora Wilder." She smiled at the sound of her name, Nora Wilder. Not Nora Ashworth, not Mrs. Anyone. Just herself, reclaimed and remade and free. "I'm just a woman who left a bad situation." "Yes," Liam said quietly, "and that is the most incredible thing of all. There is." That night, Nora dreamed of a car driving north out of San Francisco as the sun rose, of the Golden Gate Bridge vanishing into the fog in her rear-view mirror, of a woman fading into a ghost, then becoming solid again. She dreamed of pine-scented forests and hand-sanded toys and a community built from shared strength. She dreamed of all the women she had helped, spreading out across the country, leaving, escaping, surviving, and finally thriving. And she dreamed of a message she had left tucked inside an old book on architectural theory, in a hidden inscription. "I am gone." This was a flawed design. The most powerful sentence she had ever written. The words that saved her. That morning, Leo launched himself onto his mother. At 5 years old, he was a ball of pure joy. "Mama, is it French toast Friday?" Lena kissed him, breathing in the sweet, irreplaceable scent of her son, the miracle she had fought so hard for. "It absolutely is, my little bear." They made French toast together, Leo carefully dipping the bread into the batter, while her husband, Mark, managed the hot pan with a calm expertise. Lena set out the maple syrup and fresh strawberries. It was a perfect picture of family life, and it was a life she had built from scratch. After dropping Leo at his preschool, Lena drove to her small restoration workshop, taking the same winding back roads she had first driven 5 years earlier when she was pregnant, desperate, and living out of a tiny motel room. Now, she was a respected historical preservationist, a mother, and a woman who had taken back her own name. At her workshop, she unlocked a specific laptop and opened an encrypted file. A simple ledger read, 16 houses restored, 16 women housed. Today, number 17 was due to arrive at 11 a.m. Her name was Isabella, a young artist whose gallery owner husband controlled her finances and her work. Isabella had found Lena's contact information tucked into an obscure Preservation Society journal and had driven 4 hours from Vermont, telling her husband she was sourcing antique frames, all to ask one question: is it really possible to start over? Lena glanced at a small framed photo of her younger self, and she knew exactly what she would say. Yes, starting over is possible. Freedom is possible. You are possible. And if you have to burn your old life to the ground to find who you are in the ashes, then you light the match. I will show you how. The bell on the workshop door chimed. Isabella entered, her expression a mixture of terror and fierce determination. Lena smiled with warmth. "Welcome, let's start building." 2 years later, a newly restored town hall in rural Massachusetts had never been so crowded. They had set out extra chairs along the aisles, Every seat was taken, and a crowd stood by the back doors. The Boston Globe had sent a reporter, and even the governor was there, sitting in the front row. Lena walked to the podium. 7 months pregnant with their first child, her hands rested on her stomach as Alara faced the crowd. Her husband, David, sat in the first row with her son, Leo, who was now 8, and their new foster daughter, Maya, who was 13. Her ex-husband, Julian, and his wife, Catherine, were also there with their daughter, Sophie, now 2. Her old mentor, Evelyn, and her business partner, Marcus, sat beside them like proud guardians. Alara had even flown her sister in from Dublin, who was beaming. The banner behind Alara announced, "The Vance Gallery Grand Opening, championing new voices in contemporary art." "Thank you all for being here," Alara began. 8 years ago, I arrived in Chicago with 2 suitcases and a crushing secret. I was sleeping on a friend's couch. I had no idea if I would make it through the next week, if my son would be okay, or if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. She paused, her eyes scanning the packed gallery. She spotted artists she had supported dotted through the audience. There was Anya from 3 years ago, now a famous sculptor in Santa Fe, who had driven for 15 hours to be there. There were others she didn't know by name, but who knew her story. Women who had heard about the curator in Chicago, who knew what it felt like to have your life's work claimed by another. I'm standing here tonight because people helped me. Evelyn gave me a spare room. Marcus gave me a chance. David gave me his whole heart. This city gave me a canvas to create a new life. And I want to spend the rest of my life paying that kindness forward. The Vance Gallery planned to do more than just sell art. A portion of every sale would go toward funding pro bono legal help for artists fighting intellectual property theft. It would also fund grants to help creators escape from exploitative contracts. It would provide mentorship, business training, and mental health resources. Everything Alara had wished for, everything she had been forced to learn on her own. We are naming our very first grant after someone who taught me a very difficult lesson, Alara went on, that people who appear to have all the power can still be lost, that accountability is the first step toward real change, that sometimes the people who attempt to erase you can become the very reason you discover your true voice, but only if you refuse to be silenced. She looked over at Julian, who nervously adjusted his tie, a hint of unease in his expression. He had not known this was part of the plan. The Nexus Protocol grant will fund digital privacy education and advocacy for young women who are just starting out in creative fields, because I have learned that controlled people control other people, and free people free other people. Julian's eyes were shining with tears. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," from across the room. After the speeches, after the champagne, and the endless stream of congratulations, Alara found herself alone on the gallery's rooftop terrace, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights were just starting to glitter against the dark. Sienna appeared beside her. They hadn't spoken in almost a year, though Alara had been following Sienna's work in digital ethics advocacy. Sienna looked different, less polished, more at ease. "I heard about the grant," Sienna said. "That was a bold move." "It wasn't about being bold. It was about being honest. Julian isn't the villain in my story. He was just a brilliant man who believed that owning data meant he also owned people. The real villain was the system that convinced him he was right, and the one that taught me my own value was tied to his name. We're trying to fix that system. I was complicit in that culture," Lena confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I viewed you as a competitor in a race for a patent, not as a woman carrying a child. I've told you before, I know, but I feel compelled to say it again. I am profoundly sorry. Isabel watched her, taking in the change. Are you fulfilled now? Lena considered the question. I don't have a lab with my name on it. I'm not keynoting any biotech conferences, but I'm helping draft policies that protect patients from what we were doing. I helped push through a major bioethics reform bill last year. So, yes, I believe I am. For the very first time, I truly believe I am. Good, Isabel said. That's all I ever wanted for you as well. They stood in a moment of quiet understanding, the Boston skyline sprawling beneath them. Can I ask a question? Lena ventured. Do you ever long for it? The penthouse overlooking the Charles, the corporate jets, any of it? Isabel chuckled softly. Not for a single moment. I longed for the woman I was before I became Mrs. Vance. The driven young researcher who could see patterns in data nobody else could. And she's finally back. But she's stronger now. She has a son, a daughter on the way, and a partner who is fascinated by her mind. She has colleagues who champion her. She has work that saves lives. That woman has no need for a penthouse. From the other room, Noah's voice called out, Mom, Ben says they're lighting the candles on the cake. Isabel smiled. I should go. My son has a deep and abiding passion for funfetti. Isabel, Lena said, stopping her, thank you for proving there was a way to build something meaningful instead of just being the first to publish. You're the one who did the work, Isabel replied. I just showed you the door wasn't locked. 3 months later, Isabel gave birth to her daughter on a brilliant fall morning. In stark contrast to Noah's tumultuous entry into the world, Amelia Rose Reyes was born in calm, surrounded by affection in a hospital room with a view of the Arnold Arboretum. Ben held his daughter for the first time, tears openly tracing paths down his cheeks. Noah, brought in to meet his little sister, was unusually solemn, touching her impossibly small fingers with reverence. She's so tiny, he breathed. You were that tiny once, too, Isabel told him, her own voice thick with unshed tears. Did you love me this much back then? Even more, she whispered back. I loved you so much, I broke the entire formula to keep you safe. Noah mulled that over. Because love is about the truth. Yes, my sweet boy, love is about the truth. Damien visited the next day, bringing not a bouquet, but a small, beautifully bound first edition of a seminal genetics textbook. I wanted to give her her first piece of research, he said quietly. Ben helped me choose it. Isabel was momentarily speechless. It's perfect. Damien sat carefully in the chair next to her bed. I never had this with Noah. The chance to hold him like this, to see who he resembled right at the start. I missed all of it. I know you regret that. Don't be sorry, he said, his tone firm. That was a price I deserved to pay, but I am grateful beyond words that you've allowed me to earn a place in his life again. He gazed down at the sleeping Amelia. She has your eyes. She has your mother's middle name, Isabel answered softly. Damien's head snapped up, his expression one of shock. Rose stood by me when it mattered most. She told me the truth about what you were doing, even though it meant she might lose you. That required immense courage. Our daughter deserved a name that honored that kind of strength. Thank you, Damien whispered, his voice cracking. For everything. For leaving. For fighting me. For forcing me to see the man I had allowed myself to become. You did the most difficult part, she said. You chose to actually look. Most people never do. Later, after Damien had left and Ben had taken Noah home for the evening, Isabel sat in the quiet room with her daughter. She thought of the woman she had been 8 years prior, pregnant and petrified, uncovering manipulated trial data on a secure server in their cold, minimalist penthouse. That woman could never have fathomed this. A second child, born into honesty, a partner who was her equal in every way, a son who was flourishing, a career that had profound meaning, a community that had rallied around her. Your brother was born into a web of secrets, Isabel murmured to the sleeping infant. You were born into peace. That is the difference 8 years can make. That is what happens when you have the courage to rewrite your own code. 5 years later, Noah was 13, Amelia was 5, and Isabel was 43 when the journalist from a prestigious scientific journal contacted her. She wanted to write a feature on whistleblowers who had challenged the giants of the pharmaceutical industry, telling the story of the scientist who outmaneuvered a biotech CEO to protect her research and her child. Isabel's story, reframed for the public, would be the centerpiece. I need to consider it, Isabel told her. That evening, she called Damien. They communicated this way now, like two seasoned veterans, coordinating Noah's schedule for robotics camp and Amelia's upcoming piano recital with the easy cadence of modern co-parenting. A major journal wants to do a big profile, she told him, about women who get out, about my story. What are your thoughts? I think it could empower a lot of people, but I also fear it could make you a target again. All of us. Are they going to use your former name, Dr. Isabel Vance? Isabel was silent for a long while. I haven't been Dr. Vance in 13 years. I hardly remember what she felt like. She felt brilliant, Damien said gently, and trapped. Always so trapped, even when she was accepting awards. Dr. Isabel Reyes doesn't feel trapped. No, he conceded. She feels free. Isabel chose to do the article, but only on the condition that she could steer the narrative and ensure her family's privacy was protected. The journalist consented. They collaborated for 6 months, documenting Isabel's work at her bioethics firm, speaking with scientists she had advised, and highlighting the network of legal and ethical experts she had cultivated. The article, titled "The Geneticist Who Broke the Sequence," went viral. It won a Science Journalism Award and ignited a mainstream dialogue about corporate malfeasance in medical research, the personal cost of whistleblowing, and the ways proprietary data could be used as a tool of control in personal relationships. Isabel watched the online conversation erupt from the sofa of their comfortable Cambridge home, surrounded by her family. When the first wave of attention subsided, Noah, now 15, looked over at her. You're incredibly brave, Mom. I was incredibly scared, Isabel corrected him softly. But I did what was necessary. That's all bravery is. Being terrified and moving forward anyway. Amelia, now 7 and full of spirit, declared, When I grow up, I'm going to be a scientist and a truth teller, just like you. Isabel drew her daughter into a warm embrace. You can be absolutely anything you want to be. That is the entire point. The choice is yours. A decade after the scandal, the story of Isabel Vance's whistleblowing had become a legend in biotech circles. The brilliant geneticist who vanished with her son, the pharma CEO who faced a public downfall and reinvented himself as an advocate for research transparency. The rival scientist who sacrificed her ambition to expose the truth. The reality was quieter and more meaningful than any of the rumors. Dr. Isabel Reyes, age 45, ran one of the most respected bioethics consulting firms in the nation. Her foundation had offered legal and financial support to over 400 whistleblowers in the sciences. The movie rights to her article had been optioned. Damien Vance, age 51, had launched a foundation dedicated to funding independent, transparent clinical trials. He divided his time between Boston and the Bay Area, guiding his new initiative, but no longer consumed by a need to dominate the market. He had dinner with Noah every Thursday. He saw Amelia every weekend. He had married his new partner, Catherine, in a private ceremony and appeared to be genuinely content. Lena Petrova, age 42, was a senior policy advisor for the World Health Organization in Geneva. She never married or had children, but she found her calling in deconstructing the very systems she had once manipulated. She and Isabel were not close friends, but they were allies in a vital cause. Lena sent Isabel a message every year on the anniversary of the data leak. The subject was always the same, the day the sequence changed, and her former mentor, Evelyn, now 82, served on her firm's advisory board. Maria, her former lab assistant, who now ran the Whistleblower Foundation with Isabel's financial support, had written a memoir titled The Data We Trust, The People Who Don't. It became an instant bestseller. Grace Thompson, now married to her longtime partner and a mother of 2 adopted children, managed the Foundation's day-to-day work, keeping everything running smoothly. She and Isabel were as close as sisters, raising their children side by side, their bond forged in shared struggle. Damian Vance continued to build his tech empire, the stoic, unshakable man everyone knew. He had personally funded the construction of over 200 cribs for the children of the women the Foundation had helped. Each one represented a safe, new beginning. On the 10th anniversary of her escape, Isabel stood on a pier in the Boston harbor, where she had once watched Noah take his first, hesitant steps. She had requested the day for herself, feeling the need to mark the occasion alone, to pay tribute to both the woman she had been forced to be and the one she had chosen to become. Her thoughts drifted back to that night 10 years ago, activating the emergency transfer protocol from their sterile penthouse apartment in the middle of the night, the paralyzing fear and the wild hope of the medical transport van pulling away, hiding out in a small clinic, the kindness of a nurse, and giving birth to Noah during a crippling nor'easter. Every single choice had brought her to this exact moment. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. The encrypted message appeared on her tablet. The sender was anonymous, but the terror was palpable. My husband is Julian Croft, the celebrity chef. Everyone in New York loves him, but they don't see him at home. I'm 32 weeks pregnant, and I need to get out. I found your name on a sommelier forum, a whisper about a vintage that can give you a new life. Can you help me? In her quiet Santa Fe art gallery, surrounded by abstract sculptures, Amelia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her reply was brief and coded. We have a private viewing Thursday at 11 a.m. Your vintage is waiting. You're not the first, and you will be safe. She watched the desert sunset paint the sky, the rugged mountains, a silhouette of resilience. It mirrored the spirit of the women she helped. The world had forgotten the story of the art curator who vanished from her powerful husband's life years ago. But the woman she became never stopped sculpting paths to freedom, and she continued to illuminate the way for others seeking refuge. The woman known as Alara Vance was a ghost. In her place stood a creator, a protector, and her existence was a tribute to every woman who dared to break the mold and forge her own destiny.